Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the energy track of the Warsaw Security Forum. For the first time ever, we will be debating together defense and energy issues. And so I'm very glad to have all of you here gathered in Warsaw, but also persons following us on internet. And we are opening this exciting journey starting with energy. My name is Michał Kurtyka. I was COP24 President, Chair of International Energy Agency Ministerial Meeting in 2019, but also Minister of Climate and Environment of Poland, Vice Minister of Energy, Vice Minister of Environment. So I know well issues that we are going to debate. And maybe just let me start with one following remark. When 1 year ago, Kasia Pisarska, the spirit and organizer of this conference, said to me, well, it would be good to discuss together energy with defense, I said, yes, of course, what a perfectly nice idea. We will have a nice discussions and we will have a lot of time to combine the two together. But then, 24th of February, Russian aggression to Ukraine, and then very recently, 27th of September, sabotage of Nord Stream 2 pipeline and opening of Baltic pipe the same day opens a completely new perspective for discussing together energy and defense issues. Even if we Europeans are not at military war with Russia, Russia is at proxy war with Europe related with resources and energy. And stakes are rising. Economic survival, social cohesion, political disorder, these are the stakes ahead of Europe this winter. And we will have to find common answers both for our energy systems and for our defense and sovereignty. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad and very happy to start with the first panel with my colleagues, ministers, and it will be a great pleasure to start with a panel starting with 3D, diversification, derussification, and we will have the pleasure to see 3 of ministers from the region. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start. In the middle. So, my great pleasure to host with me my distinguished colleagues, and first Mr. Rinat from Estonia. You served previously as minister also in the Estonian government, but right now, very recently, you took this hot portfolio. So how it is to be minister in this time? This is the first question that I will ask you. And of course, having with me Dainius, my long-term friend from Lithuania. And George, thank you very much for joining us from Romania. It's a great pleasure to have all of you. And so, Rinat, how is it to be minister during such a difficult time?
I'm a very risk-averse person, so I want to take a portfolio that I know what it's about, and everyone knows that what energy is about this year, and it is a difficult portfolio. So, but I prefer portfolio without surprises. So it was an easy decision for me.
Yes. So you mean no surprises? I mean, you know what you have to do.
Yes, I know what I have to do.
And that's perfect, because that's precisely the challenge that we have. So how do you see the long-term and short-term challenges ahead of us during this time? Because on one side, we need to increase the provision of hydrocarbons. We need to find gas, coal, oil. And at the same time, we need somehow to get rid of hydrocarbons. How to combine such a paranoid situation, these both challenges?
Actually, I think we're on track, and the things we had to do, move away from Russian energy sources and decarbonize, it's happening, and it's happening even quicker than we would have done it otherwise. So Europe is moving away from Russian energy in a pace that no one would have expected. And at the same time, we all realize that this oil shale or coal, it's a temporary solution. We do it to survive this 1 or 2 difficult winters, but at the same time invest into renewables, to have local production with very small carbon footprint, and a reasonable price, affordability for the people as well. So I see this as a hiccup that doesn't move us away from a long-term track. In the contrary, it moves us there in a faster pace than we would have expected. So, and we talk about challenges. I think for governments, it's security of supply. That's why when we debate the gas price cap or something, I would say that, let's be careful. The security of supply is essential. This is what we are responsible for. If the price is high, we can compensate. The benefits, this is an easy thing to do for every politician, but the security of supply is a much difficult, challenge for us, and this is something that we together should ensure in Europe.
Okay, so you are not afraid of accumulating costs in the coming winters of going at the same times, short-term providing hydrocarbons and at the same time investing in long-term diversifying from hydrocarbons?
No, I admit the costs, but in order to compensate for the high prices for the domestic consumers are high. But the investments, they are not state investments. So we should encourage private sector investments and offering the certainty that renewable energy is the future for Europe. You are free to invest. Let's make the planning process easy and everything. So this is not a risk that the countries or governments should take. So we are responsible for the security of supply and compensating for the domestic consumers. But we have to make the environment, in a way, or to attract the investments. The money is there, the interest is there. We need firm political decisions that the coal and oil shale and everything with carbon, it's temporary. No matter what, we are moving towards renewables. So.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Dainius, in Lithuania, this challenge has been long-term solved, so you have a vibrant private sectors in terms of renewables. You have lots of companies also present in Poland. I know them, and they are very active. But at the same time, you did a lot to guarantee what Rina was talking about, the energy security for Lithuania. We built together Litpol Link. We started to build the Harmony Link, another link joining Baltic states through Lithuania with Poland. We started synchronization, so there is a lot that you have on your plate in terms of guaranteeing long-term security of supply and at the same time having this vibrant private sector. But how do you see the challenges of combining short-term and long-term at the same time?
Short term, actually, yeah, there is some schizophrenia that you need to use fossil fuel very actively in the energy systems. And for example, in capital city this winter we will use for heating heating oil, and we switch from gas because gas prices is skyrocketing. So that it is as it is. You need to first of all to look at the, let's say, mood of society, at the capabilities of society to pay bills, and at the same time to plan long-term investments, to create a favorite environment for renewables, for solar parks, for wind, offshore, onshore wind parks, and for us, it's let's say it's I wouldn't say it's normal job, but still, you are combining. Short term, you are moving forward. You are doing what you have to do. A lot of politics we now have in the country. Just last week, I went through non-confident vote. I won in Parliament. So this is very tense situation. But at the same time, we are looking towards the future.
I truly believe that here in Warsaw, we have a great venue to discuss and share our perspectives on those issues, and that the outcome will serve us as solid ground on how to effectively face Russian aggressive neo-imperialism and the multidimensional consequences of this war. As a result of Russia's brutal invasion in Ukraine, we face a security crisis.
Country in Europe,
we have hoped we would never face again a full-scale
our generation,
Russia's aggression has proven Moscow's neo-imperial ambitions into general disregard for the European security architecture and rules-based international order, as well as readiness to use military force against its neighbors. There are no doubts that the attack has been planned from the very beginning of the Russian military buildup. Before the invasion, Moscow had cynically played for time, continuing its apparent engagement with the West. All that to complete the necessary military preparations with no goodwill to find a diplomatic solution. This lesson should be considered while reassessing further approaches to Russia. From the very beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the Belarusian regime has sided with Moscow, directly supporting the aggression. Therefore, just as Russia, Belarus should face the same level of our pressure on them. Poland is committed to the 360-degree approach. Therefore, we continue participation in efforts aimed at tackling challenges related to NATO's southern flank and the EU's southern neighborhood. They are usually associated with countering and preventing terrorism and illegal migration, as well as stabilization of the region. But one should admit that Russia's footprint on the 300
companies very eager to invest, and that's why what I mentioned that 2025 our plans is to have 50% already electricity generated from renewables.
Okay, so in a way, this having reference, you are providing a bit the same answer as Rina. So let's survive the following winters, and let's move towards renewables, and if we lack electricity, then we have interconnectors. But what if we in Poland lack coal? And you know very well, you come very frequently to Poland, and we have seen 2 weeks ago only in Rzeszów together at the discussion. So you know very well that we have an ongoing discussion about whether yes or not we will have enough resources for Poland. So how do you see this interdependence, which is a pillar of your energy security, if other countries are starting to experience shortages?
What I mentioned, that in Lithuania we have enough generation, but electricity is very, very pricey. And as well, we have LNG terminal. So infrastructure is in the place. We could import as much gas as we need. There is no problem. And we could generate electricity as much as we need. But of course, there is the question of price. And when you have question of price, it's a question how deep the government pocket is, how much you can subsidize people and companies and so on. So this is the issue. Yeah, I can understand Poland's situation about coal, but for every problem there is solution. And as I discussed with Minister Rana Moskva, that we are solving the problem, and I think we found solutions, and already found some solutions how to deal with it.
You are a very experienced politician. You are in Seimas since 2012, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yes.
10 years.
Have you ever seen such a challenging situation in terms of social risk?
Yeah, I have, because I was minister at the crisis in financial crisis 2008, 2010. I was minister of economy, and I went through as well. It was a very similar experience, I would say. It's when you are at the center and everybody is angry on you. It's you in media coverage every day. You are on all news. So this is very similar situation. That it's like time machine. I went back to my last experience, so it's not big change. But what is different, that now we are fighting war. In Ukraine, we together. Ukrainians first, of course, in front line. We are fighting Russia, but as well, Russia, 10 months prior, with physical war, started energy war against Europe, and the storages were left have filled. The supply to spot market of gas was reduced. And prices started to skyrocket already 10 months prior to the war. So, and this is the difference. This is the difference because you don't know how long we are going to suffer, let's say, this energy war. With simple crisis, you know that, okay, there is a cycle, 1-2 years, and that it is done. Now it's not clear. That means you have to be prepared to fight long. And you should, let's say, be ready to face this challenge. And you should as well encourage and to have dialogue in society about this challenge. But, for example, if we would like to compensate for companies, for households, electricity, gas prices, issue is how long you are going to need to do that. Half of a year, 1 year, 2 years, nobody knows. That means you don't know how much is going to cost for you, and that means you should be very careful. Let's say
planning your money, in fact, also in a way, yes. But okay. But we are also discussing among two most pro-Ukrainian countries, Poland and Lithuania, of course, all Baltic states. But so it's an easy discussion. Yes, we have to suffer. Okay, we have to suffer. Do you see the same determination when you discuss with our German, French, or Spanish or Italian colleagues?
Yeah, but just Friday we spent one day in Brussels. General mood is everybody is ready to, I wouldn't say to fight, but everybody ready to face this challenge. Actually, some countries have problems. Okay, if you take Central Europe, Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, they are very dependent on Russia. It's only one source for gas is Russian pipes. And you can understand their worry. You can understand their worry. And this is vulnerability. And this vulnerability we built via last 2 decades. And Russia was, let's say, having strategy, very clear-cut strategy, to connect Europe via pipelines, via oil supply, via gas supply, in order to have and to use this as some tool to influence the policy of the countries. And now we are using this tool. We are using this tool, and for some countries it's very difficult to let's say find an answer in this situation. But what we see again as a collective West, as Russians say, collective West. We are fighting collective West. So we are moving forward very fast. And you can look what is going with LNG terminals, for example. 2 terminals were opened in Holland. 4 terminals are now to be built in Germany in coming let's say 5 months. We are going to have terminals in Finland, Estonia just in December. So all around Europe, the decisions are made, the infrastructure are going to be built, and then I guess next year for us could be a bit easier. But still, next year is not going to be let's say, year when we could relax. So,
Rinat, you wanted to add something.
Yes, we spent last Friday at the council meeting, and as you asked about what's the general feeling about the Russification of energy sources, and I would say that many countries just wrongly assess the risks. So I also told my colleagues that we have a choice. Do we sanction or price cap Russian energy sources? If we decide not to do, then we just sit and wait when Putin decides to turn off the gas for us. This is the choice we are facing. So there's no hiding that Russia is not a trustworthy partner. Although you have a large share of Russian energy in your energy mix, it's not your choice or your decision to continue this way. It's Putin's decision. And this understanding, it's not there behind the council table. This is what we need to explain and repeatedly explain, that the risks that we take in a situation of war are enormous. And even though we discuss energy, it's never about energy. The front is in Ukraine, but we are all in a war.
Exactly, we are at proxy war, and here in the Baltic Sea we started to see this war entering into the infrastructure, because through delivery of gas, and right now we are having Nord Stream, one of the string of Nord Stream 2, the string B, which is being destroyed. The other one, by the way, is still operating, and Nord Stream 1 as well. Is it the same view from the Black Sea? Because you are much closer, but the challenges, whether are different, and how do you see them from Romanian perspective?
First of all, thank you for the invitation, and let me say that it's a pleasure for me to represent the Ministry of Energy from Romania at this important event. As my colleagues already stated, it's a challenging time for all the countries in the region, and let me remind everybody that Romania stands with Ukraine in this conflict, and we are in the first line of helping and sending aids to the Ukrainians, and a lot of refugees came to Romania and are very well accommodated in our country. Referring to your questions about the challenges in the Black Sea, let me say that Romania is in a quite fortunate position nowadays due to our balanced energy mix. Let me tell you that we have a very important share of renewables already in place in Romania. We continue with our nuclear program, expanding our nuclear power plant in Cernavodă by building 2 more nuclear reactors. So basically we are doubling our power generation from nuclear. Also implementing the small modular reactors technology in Romania. Last week we signed a protocol of collaboration between the companies. We established the project company for these small modular reactors, and we have a very good bilateral communications with our strategic partners, the United States of America, in this project. So taking steps in order to consolidate our nuclear program. Referring on the gas situation, let me say that we are looking, because the main topic of discussion is diversification, de-Russification, and decarbonization. So these 3 concepts are very closely linked together, and diversification, as I told you about our balanced energy mix, you can see that Romania is taking steps in diversification of supply and also of production. And as we are looking to other sources of importing natural gas, also we are taking important steps into finding more production sites. And we started the production in the Black Sea in June this year, where an American company is extracting around 1 billion cubic meter of natural gas per year. So it's a help of our energy system. And also, let me say that the Romanian national company, Romgaz, bought the shares of Exxon in the most important deposit of natural gas in the Black Sea, and we are hoping that extractions will begin from 2026. So our measures of importing natural gas are on the short term. It's a few years that we will need this gas to be brought into Romania, and we are exploring the possibilities of reaching an agreement with Azerbaijan in this respect, and or using the LNG terminals in Turkey or in Greece.
So you are in a very different position from all three countries here, especially Lithuania, Estonia, but also in a way Poland, because you have on one side your nuclear power plant, Czernawoda and
Czernawoda, yes.
Yeah. And at the same time you have large deposits of natural gas. So how are you going to strive the balance? What will be the more important, decarbonization or diversification? How are you going to solve it in short and long term?
Of course, that you already aware that we consider natural gas as a bridge fuel. So our main target is to decouple our economic growth with the impact on the environment. So Romania is looking forward for a green transition on the economic sector. In order to achieve this, this is why I told you in the beginning that we have dropped an unprecedented level of financing for renewables. We have a lot of projects, bigger shares of financing available for investments. So we need to still be focused on our transition path, keep our eye on the ball, and continue with this decarbonization process that Romania started around 8 years ago, when the first drop of renewables were taking place in Romania.
If you allow, but because I think it's a very interesting perspective, again, neither Poland nor Lithuania recently, but Estonia, we are not nuclear countries. But when you say, okay, let's go for a green transition, it makes all Europeans more or less agree. If you say gas is a bridge fuel, well, more or less everybody will agree, even if we will probably not say loudly what does it mean, a bridge transition, and how long a bridge should take. But if you are talking about nuclear, it's not making unanimity in Europe. How do you see this discussion among your peers, and whether we consider, yes or not, that nuclear is part of our survival, or it's just something not that much important? Maybe you and Danish, you...
Of course, the nuclear program is very important in Romania, and I think that it will mix, it's a very good mix with renewables, the nuclear. Of course, renewables with storage capacities, and nuclear for base load of production. But it's the same thing with the coal. There are the different countries that are not sustaining the production of energy through coal, as there are countries that are not sustaining the production of energy through nuclear. I think that every country, cooperation and collaboration is very important nowadays, and we see that together we are stronger in the face of every aggression that is happening. But we should look very carefully about the specifics of every country and use in a very smart and intelligent way all the resources that each country have at its disposal.
Danish?
Lithuania had a nuclear power plant, and we are still closing it and dismantling it. We imagine our future until 2030 that electricity, I mentioned on 100% we are going to have generated from renewables. But what we see that demand for electricity, having in mind that decarbonization means that electricity is the core energy, you are going to need more and more electricity for mobility, for decarbonization of industries, and so on and so forth. It means nuclear is inevitable from my point of view. Actually, to balance renewables, it's going to be a challenge. Actually, we don't have technologies, as hydrogen technologies, for example, at the place how to produce efficiently electricity from hydrogen and so on and so forth. So this is a lot of technological challenges we are going to have, but we are going to solve them. But nuclear, what was mentioned, George mentioned that for base load, for stability of the grid is the solution, particularly with small modular reactors, maybe in the future those reactors become more and more safe and more and more, let's say, cleaner from radiation point of view. This could be a solution, but this solution will be available, what I hear from technicians, from scientists, after 2035. New generation small modular reactors. When we talk about 3 plus, 4 generation reactors. And in Lithuania, we're considering that when demand will increase further, this could be a solution, because we in Lithuania and after 2030 there is no place where to plant new wind farms or solar farms. It's done. But, and if you need to go further, nuclear is the solution. And I think the right mix for decarbonization, it's my personal point of view, is nuclear together with renewables.
So
now,
if you had a time machine, you spoke already previously about a time machine, would you close Ignalina?
Yeah, but you see, we had to close because both reactors were Chernobyl-type reactors, and NBK. We had to close. But in 2012, we had already a contract agreement with Hitachi to build new reactor. And in the country, we had a referendum on whether to build this power plant. Actually, I would like to say, at that time, we were fighting information war with our eastern neighbor. Russians at that time wanted to construct one power plant in Kaliningrad, second in Belarus, next to our border, and we are pressed, let's say, in information area that to stop this project.
Yes, so in fact,
we lost the referendum.
We lost. Yeah. So in fact, this proxy energy war already started previously.
You see, our experience is longer than that. In 1991, after just when we announced our independence, at that time, Soviet Union started energy blockade for us. We had no oil, no gas. At the time, we didn't have heating, we didn't have cold, warm water and hot water and so on. But our experience, we know what we were facing now, we knew already 30 years ago. When we sold our refinery to Williams, an American company, Russians stopped supplying oil via pipeline. And we built oil terminal. Second step was war for gas independence. When Russia started to intervene into our internal politics via manipulating with gas prices. We built our LNG terminal. So now we are facing the last phase. We are still with our Baltic colleagues in electricity system together with Russia, and we are desynchronizing from them. But we are now safe because we have links. We have connectors. I mentioned with Poland, with Synchronous connector. We are ready to synchronize in emergency synchronization in any time. We have connector with Sweden, with Finland. So from security point of view, we are safe. So
you say, okay, you say, I come back a little bit to my long-term perspective. So you say nuclear, yes, small modular reactors, yes, because in fact Russia forbid us through information war of going in this direction. Maybe it's the same, and that would be my question to Rina, with shale gas. How do you see this equation? Are we going to come back to shale oil, shale gas in Europe?
No, I don't think so. But as Estonia is not counting on small modular reactors to decarbonize, to rusify, or diversify. We will do it before the small modular reactors are commercialized or commercializable. And the answer is Estonian wind. Estonia is so small that we only need 1,000 megawatts onshore wind, 1,000 megawatts offshore wind to cover our yearly consumption. So the goal is to cover our yearly electricity consumption only by renewable sources by 2030. So we are trying to be Lithuania. You know, the Baltic competition goes on all the time.
Who's going to be the first, yes,
yeah.
to put...
but at the same time, for base load, we have this heat and power co-generation plants working on local biomass. We need a hydro pumping station that Lithuania already has. And the question is whether it's a biomethane station working on local biogas. And we have oil shale, and since the production facilities are not, they are functional. So
you are very unique in this regard in Europe.
Yeah,
oil shale is nobody else is producing.
And it's the worst in terms of waste. But if it is 1 week without wind, well, we can burn the oil shale for 1 week. It's still cheaper, it's still cleaner, and it's still local. So.
Okay, so that would be your answer to the intermittency of wind and other renewables. Okay, and let's come back to Romanian perspective. How?
Because Rina told about and mentioned about the offshore plans that they have, let me say that we are also in a competition in the Black Sea, because the World Bank showed us a potential for offshore wind in the Black Sea, and Romania has a lot of potential in this respect. And also we are in a competition with the other countries in the Black Sea to be the first country that will deploy offshore wind in the Black Sea. And the position of the strategic position of Constanța port is very important now due to this war in Ukraine. And also we are working with the World Bank in order to find legislative and framework that will provide balance between the Romanian interests in deploying offshore wind and the investors' needs.
Thank you very much. I have recently discussed with our friend Fatih Bureau, and International Energy Agency provides us with the recent data that in OECD countries, gas consumption decreased by 10% in the last month. So we are adjusting, whether it's because prices are too high, whether there is not enough gas, but we are a little bit adjusting. So my question would be to you, and it's a difficult question. Are we going to win this energy war? I mean, are we going to experience shortages of energy during this winter compared with your knowledge of ministers, with your knowledge of your resources, but also with your knowledge of the peers, are we going to have enough energy to produce electricity, to heat our houses, or should we be at least mentally prepared for some kind of additional troubles? Rina, you start.
I think the base scenario is that we have enough energy, but it involves energy savings as well. So it's whether it's a smart demand response to the price level. For example, Estonian consumer is very price sensitive. In September, year-on-year gas consumption fell 41%.
Wow.
Because the prices are so high. We have no national measures or limitations. It just happened due to the price signals. And the consumption, I think, falls in Finland, probably in Latvia and Lithuania as well. And in the region, I think we don't have any these substantial shortcomings, but we are in a situation of war. Everything changes if Putin turns off gas, for example, for Hungary. It changed everything for Europe. So I think we should work on crisis solutions as well. What do we do if something happens, like with Nord Streams, or because these are risks.
One of these terminals that Danius mentioned will not be in place early enough, or will be mysteriously broken in a different manner. What do we do then, Danius? What would be your answer?
You see, what we have, what we see from data, the consumption of gas is falling, and drastically. I saw discussions about this Fatihat announcement that maybe those data for this spike is the period is taken too short, and so on and so forth. So, what we hear from authorities, European authorities, NSOG, gas regulators, that we are going to have enough gas in Europe. Yes, we have to save. We have, and mandatory is to have plans for every country to save gas. To have at least in Lithuania, we have emergency plan, what we are going to do if some shortage in the region appear, how we are going, let's say, to switch off some consumers, industries. Everything is prepared, everything is in the place. So, but main scenario, what Rina told, is that we are going enough gas. We're going to have enough gas this winter, and we are not experience the shortage.
Perfect. And from Romanian perspective,
it's a very tough question. And 2 weeks ago at a conference, I heard a speaker saying that this winter is going to be a geopolitical winter, and but of course spring will come. So it's very. We'll end in a hope, with a hope in our mind. Our deposits are, gas deposits are almost full. 87% is the level of gas in our deposits. We are preparing for the winter. Of course, it will be a lack of responsibility not to see every scenario, and even in our worst case scenario, we will see that shortages may occur in the gas market. But same as Rina said, I think due to the prices, we will see a decrease of consumption naturally because of the high prices in gas.
Thank you very much for your extremely important perspective. You are at the front line of the proxy energy war, so your perspective is reassuring. But nevertheless, you are saying it's a war. there will be lots of uncertainties. So my last question would be, and I would like to ask you to have a very short answer. In this energy war, are we going to keep Europe's cohesion? Are we going to keep Europe unity? If we meet next year at Warsaw Security Forum and we prepare for the next winter, will we be able to say, okay, the winter 2022-2023 was the most difficult, I would say, geopolitical winter ever, but we as Europeans, we won because we kept our unity. Are we going to keep our unity?
Yes, I'm an optimist. I think this is what we all have to work for, that because after geopolitical winter, we'll have geopolitical spring. And if we lose the will to be united and let Russia divide us in the question of energy, not only Ukraine has lost, we have lost. And this is a future I think no one here wants. So I've repeatedly said that Russia is afraid of democracy, and democratic states being united, it's a weapon Russia has no match for. So this is something that we need to work on. This is our advantage.
Danius, very quickly.
We will keep our unity. Actually, what we need further moves with European-wide decisions, and each council we are moving forward with. And last council we voted one reglement, and now our discussions are going to evolve around gas cap, and I think that we are going to be successful because we need to change some parameters. For example, the indexes, gas TTF index, which is connected to pipelines and have nothing with new situations. So decisions are needed to take, and I think that we will find decisions all together in Europe, and we will face, as Rina said, after geopolitical winter, geopolitical spring.
Yes or no, George?
Of course, Romania is aligned with all the European countries, willing to collaborate in close relationships, and of course ready to help Republic of Moldova. So extending basically the European Union level, of which we are aiming to help the other countries. So not only
Europe, but also Europe with Moldova. With this optimistic accent, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank very, very much my distinguished colleagues from Estonia, Lithuania, and Romania for this wonderful opening panel of Warsaw Security Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I think it was an excellent introduction to our discussion, but from this political, let's move right now to technology. So I have a great pleasure to welcome on the scene Mr. Karim Amin, who is member of the executive board of Siemens Energy, and Siemens Energy happens to be the partner for this Warsaw Security Forum energy track. Thank you very much for coming, and the floor is yours, Karim.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of Siemens Energy, it is really my distinct honor to welcome you today as a general partner of the Energy, Security and Climate Track. I want to thank Minister Kurtika for chairing this decisive track for our future and for the future of the generations to come. I also want to thank the Casimir Pulaski Foundation for hosting the Warsaw Security Forum. In a year like this, it is very hard to overstate the importance of this meeting. Energy security and climate change has always been on the international agenda for quite some time. This year, not only this has been reinforced to act on these challenges, but also this year made it very clear that we need to view energy security and climate policy as two sides of the same coin. One side of this coin is the unique challenge, and we have heard that into the panel discussion right now, of addressing the high reliance on the Russian gas, especially for Central and Eastern Europe, where the effects are really mostly felt. Scaling up clean energy investments is crucial. There's no doubt that renewables and hydrogen is really part of the future and part of the solution. Having that said, we really also see the challenge of the intermittence. Gas will continue to play an important role in our industry, specifically for industrial consumers, for district heating, but also for power generation. As coal-fired power plants are being phased out, gas demand is also likely to increase in the near future, in the coming years, thus integrating regional gas markets and diversifying supply chain and building new LNG terminals is a very crucial task for Europe in the coming years. The other side of the coin is, of course, the climate policy and the imperative to create net zero economies. If climate change continues to be as we see it this year, and this current rate and the severe implications that has been felt this year, then we will see much more urgency to act in the future. The goal of COP27, which is next month, is move from negotiations to implementations through specific and measurable initiatives. There is no doubt that the world needs now to move from net zero goals to net zero progress. And the question really for us is, how can we make this fast progress possible? And how can we make sure that the industrialization and prosperity of Central and Eastern Europe continues? In Siemens Energy, we are convinced that the decarbonization of our energy system is not only the fastest way, but also the most effective way in which progress can be made in both the energy security side, but also on the climate policy. Every concrete step we could do today is worth more than any of tomorrow's envisioned future leaps. In our view, we need to act in three distinct areas to make significant progress now and in the foreseeable future. The first one of them is really the unprecedented investments, which is very necessary in renewables. Strategies to diversify gas supply need to be part of a very strong, accelerated general push for the energy transition, including faster deployment of renewables. This means we are looking at large investments on offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, but equally in the expansion of grids and storage systems. We're also looking at policies and regulations to promote green hydrogen and creating the conditions necessary to increase its scale and its economic feasibility. EU recovery funding will be very essential and should be swiftly made available for the industry, but also for the policymakers. We at Siemens Energy believe that the technology is not the issue. We have the technology needed for that. It's more the infrastructure and the regulation. I think the second area we're focusing on is to continue the coal to gas shift in power generation, in district heating, as well as on the industry. Of course, there is no doubt that renewables is the future, but because of their fluctuation and intermittency, we will need gas-fired power plants to secure an uninterrupted supply of energy. In addition, switching from coal to gas significantly reduced CO2 emissions. If every coal-fired power plant in operation today was converted to a modern, high-efficient combined cycle power plant, we could cut global emissions to half. And what is more is that latest technology provides solutions where gas turbines can be co-fired with green hydrogen if available at the right scale and the right economy. Third, and the most finally, is that we also see a great potential in managing the demand side. And I think Minister Rina talked about this, was her example about the price sensitivity of gas, especially when we look at industrial customers or energy-intensive customers. Just recently, in the G20 in Bali, we launched the Alliance for Industry Decarbonization, together with the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. We have seen a lot of interest and growing number of partners that are going to implement voluntary decarbonization solutions for their industrial processes. And it's here worth to note that the second largest emitter of global CO2 emission is industry. We are already supporting industries in Central and Eastern Europe by optimizing their energy consumption, by electrifying their heat requirements, and by also introducing green hydrogen into their processes. And we are prepared, of course, to do more to strengthen their economic competitiveness. Finally, I want to say that Russia's war in Ukraine has most devastating consequences, of course, for the people of Ukraine. But it's also true that, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, we have to deal with these consequences and implications. Our challenge is to ensure the economic stability on one hand side and social cohesion on the other hand side, while dealing with this two-sided coin of energy security and climate policy in the same time. We at Siemens Energy are here to support you with our technology, with our capabilities, but most importantly, with the passion and commitment of our people to the security and prosperity of Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Karim. Thank you for these remarks. And right now, let me deepen into this dilemma that we have in the second panel, Europe's green future, security and climate perspective. So in the long run, going out of hydrocarbons, in the short run, doing everything possible in order to supply them in sufficient quantities. So a little bit like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, we are going to face a very exciting panel, and I would like to ask the moderator of this panel to introduce it, Brigham McCown from Hague Center for Strategic Studies. The floor is yours, Brigham.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Brigham McCown. I'll be your moderator for today's panel. We've had a slight change in the lineup. Ms. Jorgensen from the EU Commission is not able to join us today. But we have a very capable fill-in who I will introduce momentarily. And then Prime Minister Bausch is running a couple minutes late, running from stage to stage. So he will be joining us here in just a moment. First, I'd like to introduce Tom Mindendorp, is the chair of the International Military Council on Climate and Security. Previously, he served as the Netherlands defense chief, 38 years in the military, and where he was the most, in his post, was the most senior advisor to the Minister of Defense. He's led operational and multinational units across the globe, including Afghanistan. General, welcome.
Thank you.
On the opposite end, we have Christian Zinglerson, who is the second director of the European Union Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators. Since 2020, I believe, Christian. Yes, and before joining ACER, you were the first head of the Global Clean Energy Ministerial Secretariat hosted at the IEA. Thank you and welcome. Since the Deputy Prime Minister is not with us, I'm going to go ahead and introduce him in absentia, and then we will pick up with the panel. Francois Bausch currently serves as Luxembourg's Deputy Prime Minister, as well as the Minister of Defense. A member of the Green Party, Minister Bausch was first elected to Parliament in '89 and then joined the government in 2013 as the Minister of Sustainable Development and Infrastructure. Following the elections in 2018, he was named Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Defense, and he also kept several of his other portfolios until rather recently. Gentlemen, pending his arrival, let me just mention to the audience, given the topic of Europe's green future, climate security and perspective, we thought it would be interesting to start with a broad sketch of geopolitical trends and developments, and then zoom in on specific opportunities that the energy transition offers, as well as the enormous challenges that we face during this transition. From there, I'll direct questions to the panel exploring various aspects of the energy transition. We'll go ahead and start with a question for each of you. What do you see as the most pressing and important geopolitical trends brought about by Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Tom, let me start with you.
If I look at the coming decades and what the defining trends are, I would like to mention 4 of them. First is the increasing scarcity of resources, which gives more competition over access to resources. And it's related to the second one, which is the booming demand for it. The world population is doubling in size this century. So there is an increasing gap between demand and supply globally. And the challenge of this century is how can we breach that gap? This gap is being influenced by a third trend, which is climate change. And climate change kind of aggravates the problem. It diminishes the capability of the Earth to provide resources. It reduces living spaces on Earth. So it makes it harder to bridge that gap. And a fourth defining trend related to Ukraine is that we are kind of moving from a world that was globalizing with a lot of economic dependencies towards a world that is more polarizing, which gives more friction. And these 4 trends together, they kind of shape the world ahead of us.
Thank you. And Christian, what do you see as the most pressing geopolitical trends?
I would find a lot of agreement with what you just said. If I were to have a few headlines myself, hi, welcome. I would say there is certainly a need for diversification as a way to protect your interests. I had the pleasure of visiting the Baltic republics last week, and I recall one interesting chart which showed gas prices in Lithuania before and after the arrival of the Klaipėda floating LNG terminal back in, I think, 2014, 2015, something like that. And at that time, you had Gazprom setting the price as the only deliverer of gas in Lithuania. And lo and behold, the gas price was pretty high because they had no other alternatives. And then they got the LNG terminal, and irrespective of the actual flow from that terminal, Gazprom lowered the price. So that was this textbook example of how to deal with a monopolist, as it were. Now, of course, much more than that in current times. But I think it speaks to the need to diversify so that you can protect your interests, but also to some extent protect exorbitant price pressures, as it were. So I think that would be one. I would definitely agree with decarbonization, as you were also mentioning. Decarbonization will be a key driver for a vast transformation, and that transformation will, of course, have winners and losers. And then finally, maybe I would also point to I don't know if it's a trend, but I definitely think it's a need to be relatively realistic and pragmatic about the trajectory up ahead, because I think this current situation shows how very sudden and unexpected shifts can create huge pressures, not only in the system, for the broader economy. So having a realistic, pragmatic approach to necessary decisions up ahead and monitoring progress towards the targets made, I think is, if not a trend, then certainly good advice we can heed from the current situation.
Thank you. And Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And you were introduced in absentia, but we are on our very first question, and we understand, I explained that you were running from stage to stage. We were talking about, what do you see as the most pressing and important geopolitical trends facing the EU right now and your country?
The biggest threat is coming from the energy crisis, because if you look at what is happening today in Ukraine, the background of this conflict is somehow also the energy dependence, our dependence on fossil fuels. Because otherwise Putin would not have been this pressure and these possibilities to influence, for example, Europe, without Europe being so dependent, for example, from gas, which is a fossil fuel. So the Ukraine crisis in some way demonstrated us how dependent we are from these fossil fuels, and also how critical the situation is for security for the security situation in the world. And there you find also then a direct link to the climate issue, because energy crisis and the energy that we are using is the basis of climate change that we are producing after. So I think we must really at least learn now the lesson that we have to decarbonize the world, that we have to get rid of these fossil fuels and not being so dependent anymore. If you are looking what is happening now in Europe, many countries trying to get rid of Russian gas, for example, but they're replacing it by gas from countries where you can also ask you some questions. Are these countries the model countries that we should really sustain at the end? If you look at what is happening, or the shift where we will take our fossil fuels, it's again critical. So really, when I started my job as a Minister of Defense in 2018, and when for the first time inside of NATO, I put the question of climate change and security issues regarding to climate change on the table, many people, even my diplomats, looked at me and said, yeah, what is he talking about? Is that really an issue? And now I'm happy that inside of NATO, inside of Europe, that has become one of the first issues that we have to consider if you're looking out on our security in Europe and in the world in general. So really, I think the energy crisis in which we are living now, and the Ukraine war, it's only the peak of the iceberg. It's really what demonstrates is where we have to change our system, where we have to change and invest also in the next years.
And I love that. And keeping with that topic, Tom, let me come back to you for a second. How do you think these events have changed policy thinking, or how should they change policy thinking? Maybe the better question.
Yeah, that's a bit the hard part, right? We are facing global problems, and global problems demand global answers. And in a polarizing world, it's harder to give those answers. But also on a national level, we see that these topics are very politicized. If you look at climate change, it's kind of a left-wing Green Party topic in many countries. Luckily, in an increasing number of countries, it's becoming a more broader political topic. And I think when we want to address this, when we all recognize this as a game changer for the future, we need to depoliticize this. We need to get this out of the political realms and the political dogfights in a country and make this a more common topic. Like our security is a common topic, climate change is also a common topic. And that would make us, would give us an enormous step forward.
Christian, let me pass the baton down to you. Do you agree, or what have we missed so far? Anything else we should be adding?
I have one, thanks. I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the current situation that Europe finds itself in. I would agree with the depoliticizing point that you just made. I would argue that goes both ways, though. So I think one lesson arguably is, for policymakers around Europe, that if you are very supply-side restrictive in your approach without tackling, shall we say, those main demand drivers of that which you wish to restrict, you either need to get alternative supplies in time or you will face a supply crunch. That will have high price impact and it will have inflationary impacts as well. So put in more plain language perhaps, I think there is a need for less ideological and more pragmatic approaches to policy. And if I can call one out there, I think this keep it in the ground movement is not the right way to go, because if you're restricting supply without restricting demand or making other alternative supplies available, you'll create price spikes inevitably. So I think sort of a more balanced approach, keeping the ambitious targets, absolutely, but then a balanced approach and monitor progress towards those targets. I think that is one lesson we can take from the current situation.
Let me follow up on that for just a second with you. So advocates of a quicker transition will say if you don't set the aggressive targets you've mentioned, it won't happen, right? So sometimes the targets are set where current technology may not be able to meet them, but the thought has always been that the technology will continue to be developed and that these goals will be met. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it reminds me of the bon mot in commodity economics, whereby the best cure for high prices is high prices, as they say. And some will probably take offense currently with that. But no, I agree, absolutely. The targets are there to serve a high purpose and they must be kept, absolutely. I think it's more the approach on how to reach them and making sure that we are not just on track in meeting the targets, but that we have alternatives in time for that which we need to get more out of. I think that's the key. And if we look at the current situation, I think it's quite revealing in some ways. So obviously there will need to be done a quite significant demand reduction of that which is causing the high prices and alternative supplies coming online, because you have a fundamental mismatch of supply and demand, not just in gas, but also in electricity across Europe. So what is the best price signal ever for demand reductions? It's actually right now. What's the best price signal ever for the new supply sources to come online actually right now because of the high prices? And yet we're not seeing progress made fast enough, which would suggest that there are other barriers. And that's the ones: institutional, behavioral, grid access, permitting, and those types of things. So that's what I think we need to double down on in the very near term.
Okay, Minister?
Yeah, I completely agree what you said, that we have to become less ideological, but more look at the practice. But if you look at the market, for example, in the energy sector, the question is, should you only look at the demand or also more focus on the offer that you have? And if you look at the offer, you can see today that many technologies that we have today, that they are existing already for decades. If you look at, for example, the technology to the power to liquid technology, which will play a major role, especially also in the defense sector in the future, creating sustainable aviation fuels, for example, SAFs via hydrogen. That's a technology that exists already for 20, 30 years, in fact, to make this transformation. But the question was always, and that was ideological, not really pushing this technology and really creating an offer for these SAFs, for example. And there I think the research, the defense sector always in the past played a major role by innovating. And I think at the moment the defense sector, for example, in the energy sector can be again the innovator. If you look at the biggest demand in sustainable aviation fuels, we will produce them we have to produce them for the defense sector. And if the defense sector produces them and will push these technologies by public money, mainly by public money, then at the end of the day you create also a market and you create also a spillover effect for the civil sector in the society. So I think in the energy fields, all the technologies, the alternative technologies are there. We have only to implement them. And that's really, I completely agree, we must be technology open, not be closed against any technology, but really push on the alternatives because they are there for a long time already.
Tom?
Yeah, well, I agree with that. But if you look at how to make it happen, I think it's a multiple-way street. It's bottom-up by building new business cases that make it profitable for businesses to invest in this. But it's also top-down by enforcing new regulations and policies that really drive the change. And it's inside out. It's also a more intrinsic value of companies, of institutions like defense, that they are part of the solution. And they need to be part of the solution. And if I look at my own environment, which is the defense environment, I think they can play a lot of roles in dealing with this. As the minister rightly said, they can be a platform for many innovations. The whole internet, GPS, all these innovations came from the defense sector. Now, why not embrace green technologies? And why not be a driver of change for green technologies within the military? I think they can make that happen and can be a very good help in enabling that change. It's all dual-use technology, so you can use it any way you want. But it does require cooperation with companies that you mentioned. It does require also defense organizations to open the doors for these kind of cooperations. And not all defense cooperation organizations are very good in that.
You know, and if I may follow up with you on this theme, as we were talking backstage, you've recently written a book, Climate General. You're known as the Climate General. And in your role in the military, cooperation amongst allied countries is very important. How do you see this going then for cooperation, whether it's on technology or whether it's in securing the resources that are necessary? Will it be cooperation or competition?
Yeah, well, first of all, the book is only written in Dutch. So if you know a good English publisher, please let him come to me. And in that book, I explain how this nexus between climate change and security, how that unfolds, built on all kinds of practical cases. And I think cooperation is a key, but it's very hard to achieve in a polarizing world. So we see increasing cooperation, for instance, in the EU and in NATO, and also the Ukraine crisis kind of stimulates that cooperation. It brings more cohesion. It drives the energy transition, as mentioned before. So those are impulses that we can use towards more cooperation. But between these power blocks, like China, Russia, and the West, cooperation is becoming harder now that we are polarizing. So also there are grounds for friction, but there are also grounds where we need to find common grounds for solutions. If you want to deal with climate change, it's a global issue. You need these countries on the table as well. And that's kind of the struggle that I'm looking at. And I think the military can be a bridging party in there. I lead a global network of security experts, senior experts from more than 40 countries all over the world. Not all Western countries, they come from all kinds of continents in the world. But they all recognize that climate change is a common ground where we can join forces. And I think that's the way to go.
Well, in keeping with that theme then, what are the prospects for climate security beyond Europe's borders, especially in the developing world? Who'd like to take that one first? Minister?
Yeah, we have, you know, Luxembourg has put a large focus on the Sahel zone in the last years, not only from the security point of view, but also for development. So we invested a lot in this zone. And if you look at the conflicts at the moment in the Sahel zone, what is it? It's mainly, a very high growth of the population. You have countries that they had 5 times more population today than they had 20 years ago, so it's really growth of the population. But on the other hand, it's mainly access to fertile land. And the Sahel zone is a zone which is hard hit by climate change because the drought and the access to fertile land it's more difficult today than it was 20 years ago. And the main basis of the conflict is access to fertile land. So if you want to look at how to improve and how to resolve this conflict, you must really try to look at it from a point of view also of climate and security, because the question is, how can you keep this fertile land, and how can everybody that lives in this zone have access to this fertile land? So only by military and by training, for example, the Malaysian soldiers, you will not resolve the conflict, because that's not what makes the conflict. What is making the conflict is access to land.
Okay. Christian, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't think our credibility on the world stage right now is sky high in terms of this energy climate nexus. I think there are some developing countries who are looking at Europe, posing themselves the questions, A, you put yourselves in a situation of severe vulnerability. B, you're mitigating it via sucking up all flexible LNG cargoes on the planet. So it's gas for you, but not for us, at least not at any affordable prices. And so I think there is, a bit of a need perhaps to draw some lessons from the current situation and translate that into something which can, shall we say, remotely accommodate what some of the developing countries face in terms of their challenges. So that's just where we are. We are trying to deal with the card that we have, given past decisions. But certainly, I think we need to accommodate the need for some developing countries for, you know, how are we looking at our near-term needs and how are we supplying them? How are we looking at a credible, pragmatic green transition pathway going forward? And what are the lessons we are drawing so that we can also share them with some developing countries? Because I don't think they're super impressed currently by how we're doing things.
If I may, I think a large part of the solution is about innovation. This gap between demand and supply, we can all fight about the scarce resources, and we can have a lot of competition to secure access, but that doesn't solve the problem. We have to solve the problem in a different way, and that's by changing our production, the way we consume, etc., by moving towards more circularity, which is an innovation question. And the West can drive that innovation and can bring those innovation practices to these developing countries. If you look at Africa, they kind of skipped the whole telephone era. They moved right into the smartphone era, and now the whole country is driving on smartphones. So we can do that on energy as well and on other areas as well, help them to make that jump towards the future and make them more resilient against these kind of changes. But it does require also all our companies to focus innovation on how to achieve circularity, because then we can reduce our dependence upon all these resources.
Speaking of developing countries and the need for materials, rare earth materials, critical minerals, most of them not found here. Do we run the risk of changing from one form of dependency into another form of dependency? China is responsible for production of a lot of the materials that go into renewables. How do we address that challenge?
Well, I think that's what I just mentioned is also about these kind of materials. So if we really focus innovation like we are doing now on the energy transition, in energy transition we are now producing energy in a way that we don't need to deploy or to exploit resources from the ground, from the earth. Indirectly we do still. But we don't need fossil fuels anymore. We can produce our own energy, which kind of decreases the problem. But we have to do that on other areas as well. If we can focus innovation on developing materials that we can reuse, then we don't need to exploit these scarce resources as much as we do now.
Is that something that's, what's your time horizon on that for?
That's longer scale innovation.
Yeah.
That's long-term innovation.
Okay.
So for the short term, of course, energy transition, we have certain technologies existing, but we see an enormous acceleration on this area because we are now focusing innovation on it. And if we focus that innovation also on these scarce minerals, on how to find alternatives for them or how to reuse them, I'm certainly this will start moving as well.
Okay, Minister.
Yeah, I'm completely agree that research and trying to develop alternative materials is very important. And there again, the defense sector can play a big part on it. We, in our defense in Luxembourg, we spend 2% of our defense budget is going to in research. And we launched now calls to find the private-public partnership with the defense ministry to really do research on materials, on alternative materials. So that's again a good example where we can see that in the defense sector especially you can do a lot of things. But the second point is also, it's not only materials, it's also production. Isn't it crazy that Europe invented the solar panels, but they are produced now in China? Why are they produced in China? Because many companies of Europe, they went to China because they thought that it would be much more interesting from a point of view also of salaries of people that are working in these fabrics, etc. So we must bring back certain industries also to Europe. Solar panels is one example. Another example is batteries. The European Commission decided now to build up 2 or 3 battery plants in Europe. Today, we are completely depending in the electromobility sector from batteries from China. So again, the next dependence on an economic basis. So it's not only a question about materials, but also trying to build up this industry inside of Europe. If you look at what happened during the pandemic, we were dependent mostly from medicine materials from China because we have no more industry in Europe of this. And that's all what we have to rethink. But like I said, for research and development, the defense sector can be really a first mover to go in the direction of new materials.
And Christian, I'm interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. The interesting thing about rare earths is that they're actually unusually non-rare. They're quite abundant, but the extraction costs vary, but processing capacity is very highly concentrated, particularly in China. So it's maybe the processing part which is something to be looked at. I would say that there are lessons to be learned from this country, which is hosting the forum here in the, shall we say, the traditional energy department, as it were. So a while ago, this country invested in LNG facilities on the Baltic coast and contracted Qatari-sourced gas, LNG. That came at a price premium, very significant price premium to Russian pipeline flows, and I call that sort of a security of supply premium paid, which this country chose to pay and some other countries chose not to pay. I would see something similar here. Security of supply premiums perhaps being more prevalent in the future in these critical industries. I think it speaks to this balancing act between efficiency and resilience, which Tom also spoke to in the beginning, and we'll probably tilt a bit more towards resilience at the small expense of efficiency. That's just how it goes. But I would caution very strongly against, shall we say, opting for self-sufficiency as opposed to greater autonomy. Greater autonomy can go hand in hand with increased trade as long as you have multiple options and you're not heavily reliant on one dominant supplier. And I would take the solar PV case, I take your point about the industrialization aspects of it. But as I sometimes say, if you were to wake a random group of people up in the middle of the night and say, what is the main reason where they're less pessimistic about the energy transition being remotely affordable for the last 10, 15 years, what would that one example be? And I suspect many would see the very significant price decrease in solar PV. Not all, but some would. Okay, what's the main driver of that? In my humble opinion, it's the mass manufacturing capacity of Asia. Whether we like it or not, it's commoditizing an industry to the extent that you have costs which are 1/10 or less than they were 10, 15 years ago. So how can we, in an energy transition pathway, which will involve enormous investment, how can we afford not to rely on trade? Not haphazardly, not learning the lessons of vulnerability, diversification, etc. But let's not let go of that. Let's not equate autonomy with self-sufficiency. I think the price impacts for Europe would be very significant. I'm not saying you are saying it, but it's just sometimes the political debates, they don't distinguish that clearly between autonomy and self-sufficiency. I think self-sufficiency sounds very costly to me, to be very honest.
I don't want to abolish the world market. It's not a question of self-sufficiency in Europe. But if you look at what we did in the last decades, that has nothing to do with an autonomous industrial strategy of Europe. The whole European industry had been really, we put it in China or in Asia. Now we have the problem that with the uprising of China as an economic power, the United States inside of NATO, we have the biggest discussions beside of Russia we have it with China. But what would we do today? The Germans, for example, if today they would, they should have to do a boycott against China, for example, it would be completely impossible because 50% of their cars are not even sold in China, but are even produced in China. And that has nothing to do with self-sufficiency. That has something to do to look at how your industrial base is built up.
Gentlemen, as we start to head toward the end of the conference, a note to everyone in attendance. If you wish to ask a question, we're going to save the last 10 minutes. Please go ahead and go back to the back of the room where they have microphones. And as part of this, we really want to hear what's on your mind. In the interim, is there anything, though, that we're missing here that, you know, when you talk about the energy transition, we're talking about the availability of product, the reliability of product, and to some extent the affordability. Price has to come in, right? So is the answer technology, innovation, and what are the prospects in the short term, not necessarily the long term, but this winter and next winter? Are we going to have a tougher go?
I suspect yes. Unfortunately, I think it'll be a tough winter. A lot will depend, I guess, on how mild or cold it is, because that actually has quite significant implication for gas demand, and gas is the scarce resource this time round. But if we were to assume for next year that there will be limited or no Russian gas flows, either because of our decisions or their decisions, whatever the case may be, then we'll face a very tight market next year. There's not much new LNG supply coming online. We are already grabbing most of the flexible LNG available on the planet to the detriment of some developing country economies, actually. And we have unusually low Chinese demand for a number of different reasons. So if that were to increase, you'd have a very significant, shall we say, price competitor for very scarce supply. And let's face it, gas is stubbornly resilient, not because of diabolic decisions, but because of certain molecular attributes vis-a-vis our energy service needs. So it's not going to go away immediately. It can be supplemented by other things, and a lot of people are working hard at that. So I suspect next year will be very tough, and I think we need to dig in and get in emergency mode next year, the only silver lining being that we draw some lessons this year, and hopefully we can make good decisions next year with the benefit of experiences this year. That's my sober reflection. Okay.
General?
I agree, and I see countries and also companies now reassessing their whole risk management. So they're trying to diversify supply lines, to spread the risk over multiple strategic supply lines. We are building stocks again, so we are moving from just-in-time management towards just-in-case management, which is a wise decision. So we are reinventing stocks. I think we are also learning how important it is to protect these supply lines, to protect this access security through, for instance, defense efforts. So it's a combined effort, and it's another impulse to integrate our efforts more from defense, economy, etc., and not approach this in a stovepiped way.
Yeah, I completely agree with the analysis that have been done, because the energy transition, unfortunately, it takes time. So we waited too long to start the energy transition, but now we are in a complete chaotic situation with the war in Ukraine, with the stop of the delivery of Russian gas. And I'm also convinced that if this conflict will go over the next year, or continue the next year, then it will be very tough, not this winter, but next winter, because refilling the gas reservoirs next year will be much tougher than this year, because we now have no more gas at all. And the alternatives, for example, the liquid gas from Qatar, from where it comes, that will be an alternative, but only partly. That cannot replace completely, especially in a country like Germany, what they need next year. So next year, if the war continues over the next whole year, next winter will be very tough, I think.
Do we have any questions from the back of the room? It's a little hard to see with the lights up here. Yes, we do. Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Stephen London, Diplomacy Academy graduate, editor-in-chief, New York City Post. Don't worry, I'm not here for media, just as myself. First, I'd like to say thank you for the insights on energy security. It's something that's not a topic of mine, but it's very fascinating. My question is, when we talk about meeting energy needs, what do you foresee as the better approach? Do we want to improve on current technology to meet those needs? Do we research new novel technologies, or is it some kind of combination of these to meet those current and future needs? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for your question. Who would like to start with that one?
Yeah, I think a very pragmatic way of doing this is start with what we have. So we have existing technologies that we can use. And let's start with the low-hanging fruits and adopt these technologies into companies, but also in the, for instance, in my sector, the defense sector. For the longer term, especially on more high-powered equipment on ships and airplanes, etc. The technology is not yet available to make this transition. So here, it's very important that we focus innovation. And I'm always looking for the combinations. How can we create synergy? In the Netherlands, we are, for instance, creating a living lab surrounding aimed at building a fully self-supporting compound, village or however you call it, bringing together all kinds of companies, universities, tech centers to come to common solutions. And that's, I think, what is needed to really create that synergy, that innovative synergy that we all have, bring that together and find new solutions. So it's about using what we have, but developing what we don't have.
Minister?
Yeah, I think that the future of energy will not be replacing one form of energy, for example, fossil fuels by solar power, whatever, but it's also a question of being more energy efficient in general as a society. So the most low-hanging fruit is regarding how the society is functioning and making the society in its total more efficient. If you take an example, the transport sector, which today is the most important part regarding energy and climate change, for example. You must make the transport system more efficient than it is today. So, for example, being multimodal and trying to combine more every kinds of transport that you have, or how we build our houses. Most of the buildings could provide energy instead of consuming energies. So being more energy efficient is the best part of our future energy strategy. And then comes only the other alternative energies that you have really to implement. And there you have to be very technology open, it's clear, not being really focused only on one energy form, because in the future maybe we will invent energy forms that we even don't know anymore. But in general, on our planet, in our space, we have unlimited energy. We have to capture it. That's the most important thing. So the question is not being. We will never have a shortage. We should never have a shortage of energy. It's a question how we really capture the energy.
Christian?
Yeah, I'd also agree. Let's work with what we have and then innovate the new. If I were to point to two specific areas, the moonshot I see in the near term is how to take care of seasonal flexibility needs. We live in a part of the world where the seasonal swings are quite significant, and it's difficult currently to find cost-efficient solutions to tackle that. That's one of the reasons why gas is pervasive. It is eminently well placed to serve those seasonal flexibility needs, and we'll need to find something which is affordable, which can replace it, and currently we don't have it. The second innovation is less technology, and it's more political. I think there is broad agreement in Europe to get out of dependency on Russia. So far, so good. But that independence is probably going to be more affordable and efficient if we agree to become more interdependent. That's a great headline and anyone can sign up to it. But what it actually means is that we put ourselves in each other's hands, as it were, and we create new dependencies internally. We are in the EU, so we have governance and rules and sanctions. We can make it work better than some other places. But it still requires a lot of political investment, because basically, sometimes domestic politics go the other way, and as a gentleman sitting next to me will well know much better than me. So this sort of mutual reliance, while it sounds great, is actually a different way of saying, can we agree that some are more structural importers for the future, others are more structural exporters? Can we make that work over decades? That's actually not a given, to be honest, and I think where you will see the immediate test case in the next 4 or 5 months, I agree completely with the Estonian minister who was in the preceding panel. I completely agree with what she said, that she's an optimist about unity, but it also needs a bit of work. So we'll see. That's the political innovation up ahead, as I see it.
Okay. Any comments, or you?
No, I think when we look at energy transition, we should not just look at electrification, for instance. So we are moving towards a very hybrid system, which should make it possible to exchange forms of energy with each other, from electricity to hydrogen to maybe other forms of energy. And it will be a very decentralized system. So every citizen, every company is a producer of energy and is a consumer of energy. So this is not just a transition, this is a transformation of the whole energy system, becoming a system of systems and involving every citizen in the country. And how to make that work, that's the challenge that we are all looking at now. Also involving a lot of IT technology to regulate that, to finance that, and to do the costing flows of it. So that's the challenge that's now in our hands, and I see good living lab environments where this is being developed at this moment, where companies and tech institutions really know to find each other and are building more integrated new concepts of energy. And then you can produce it locally, and then you don't need to transport it all over the globe to find energy.
Okay, so you're talking about microgrids, you're talking about decentralized forms, and is there added resiliency to having a decentralized system then as well?
Yeah, because it makes you more independent. It doesn't solve the whole problem, but it can solve maybe 80% of the problem. So most of the villages and cities can be produce their own energy. It's just the high intensity industries and those areas, they need some extra help. And here you need, for instance, these big windmill parks in the oceans, etc., to produce energy. So it's a combination of the two of them, but to a large extent, we can become quite self-supporting.
Okay. I'm scanning the back of the room real quickly. Do we have, yes, we have a question. Sir, can you make your way over to the microphone at the back right over there, and please tell us your name and who you're with.
Hello everyone, I'm Iverson from Hong Kong. I'm a columnist at the Estonian newspaper Postimees. So in the panel discussion, you mentioned quite a lot of times about China. To me, it is quite concerning and alarming when you talk about the approaches, between pragmatism and the ideology. So I think this is something the moderator already asked about the question of dependency. So now, China is a country where it is dominating in the renewable sector. And we know for a fact that China is a partner where there's no credibility in terms of cooperation, in other sectors, for example, human rights, the rule of law, and the case of Hong Kong in violating the international agreement in the technical issues like, trade, custom territories, and so on. And so let's take the pragmatic approach, in the case of China, let's say that at some point we have to work with China in terms of energy cooperation. So how can we make sure that taking a pragmatic approach can ensure our energy safety while not creating dependency with China? So I want the whole panel to clarify the position because this is so alarming. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to start?
Very short, because I think at the moment it's very difficult and complicated to see how China will evaluate in the next years, because nobody knows. If you look at how they manage at the moment their pandemic, and if you look at the political interior situation with the Congress will now taking place of the Communist Party in October, with President Xi, nobody knows will he have a third mandate, and then go back in a tradition that we all thought that would be not anymore present in China. Nobody knows at the moment where China will move in the next months. I think that to giving really a precise answer to this, we must wait until spring next year to see in which direction China really will evolve.
Okay. Tom?
Yeah, I think we also need to realize that dependency is a two-way street. We are not just dependent upon China, they are also dependent upon us. We are their market. So we can use that. And instead of just protecting and becoming more autonomous, we can also use that dependency towards China to make them move in the right direction. And China is different from Russia. China really needs stability in the world around them because they have their economies is completely intertwined with Africa, with Europe, with Americas. So they depend upon these relations. And that makes them vulnerable as well. So we can use that in making that change that we would like to see.
Okay, and that's despite their Belt and Road, China Silk Road initiative, the decoupling. They're still largely dependent upon the West for their goods and services.
Yeah, of course, their income comes from the markets they have. Their resources also come to a large extent from African countries, American countries, and they want to secure that. So they depend upon those kind of strategic supply lines as well.
Okay. Christian, last word is yours.
Yeah, I think we all care about decarbonization, and we have very ambitious targets in Europe for decarbonization. I would argue that the most important decisions for where the world goes in terms of global decarbonization are made in China and subsequently in India, perhaps also Indonesia and a few other emerging markets around the world. So for that reason alone, I see no other path than some sort of engagement and collaboration if we care about global decarbonization as opposed to regional one. Secondly, I would say, as we said before, I don't know if it was the call for pragmatism which got you a bit worried as the questioner, but I think we would need to avoid levels of reliance which make us strategically vulnerable. Arguably, some countries' reliance on Russian pipeline gas, perhaps also other enemy commodities, became a strategic vulnerability, not just for them, but also because of their economic size for the entire continent. And that we need to avoid with China. Are we currently in a situation where we can rule out vulnerability vis-a-vis China? Certainly not. In some areas we are. So that we need to rectify, but certainly not throwing the full trade and relationship baby out with the bathwater. That I would find unfortunate for the global goals we're pursuing.
Okay. Well, that will do it for our panel. I'd like to thank the audience for attending, and Deputy Prime Minister, thank you so much for your time today. General, it's a pleasure. Mr. Director, thank you very much. And we stand adjourned.
Stage, Ms. Hadley Gamble, anchor and senior international correspondent, CNBC, and her guests for their panel on energetically insecure Europe, oil and gas trap.
Good early afternoon, everybody. If you want to just take your seats, we'll get started with our next panel. We're going to be talking about energy insecurity in Europe. It's a topic that I've been covering now for the last year or so. I was the last Western journalist to interview Vladimir Putin. That was last October during Russia Energy Week. And I'll be headed back to Russia next week, hopefully to press a little harder this time on those main topics. My name is Hadley Gamble. I am CNBC's senior international correspondent covering energy markets and geopolitics, as well as their anchor in the Middle East. And I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists here today. I just want to get a sense from you each how you see this playing out, because there are real questions at this point about whether we are going to see a fracture in NATO allies' unity as a direct result of energy insecurity.
Good afternoon, or good morning, actually, everyone. And yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's a question that is critical not just for the future of Europe and NATO from the perspective of the next winter, but actually we are looking at long-term perspective, whether Europe and NATO allies can stand united against the threat that is coming and is happening when it comes to Russia using its energy as the weapon against democratic world. So I think there is no other way for Europe and NATO to survive but stay united and show the example of unity and make sure that it's not just about surviving but about thriving together.
Alexander.
Well, I believe that actually what we've seen is a display of unity inside the alliance, not via the instruments of the alliance, but when Russia weaponized gas against Germany and other Central European nations, what we've seen is Norway, the Netherlands, and the United States actually, coming to the help of these countries. We in Germany now get most of our gas from Norway. The Dutch have been great in providing more gas, and LNG imports from the United States have grown significantly. So I wouldn't think of this as a fractious issue, but an issue that needs management, obviously, so that it doesn't turn into a fractious issue. But for now, I am quite satisfied at the level of solidarity inside the alliance.
Yeah, I think Europe has shown actually a remarkable unity and solidarity with Ukraine and with each other, like European countries. And I think that's a really good sign for the future. Although I must say that I am a bit worried because of the energy crisis unfolding and putting so much stress on households, on industries in Europe, and winter is only, starting to come, so we don't know yet what will happen. But so that's probably something to be cautious about, and we truly need to be resolved, like not really waiting for things to happen, but having predictable strategies and saying, yes, whatever it takes, we will stand united.
It's been interesting to watch various leaders' approach to this because some of them have explained their energy policies to their various citizens by saying, we're on a war footing at this point with Russia, and others have been a bit more nuanced about it. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, recently coming out with this 200 billion euro package. Now, this is something that has proved, as you say, fractious at this point, because we have a lot of pushback. I'm hearing it from Hungary, Lithuania, Italy, Mario Draghi even weighing in and saying this is not necessarily the best approach. Walk us through that, Alexander.
Well, I believe the 200 billion euro package is supposed to send a very strong signal that Putin's weaponization of energy is not going to work in Europe's largest economy. The government has been very resolute about answering it. It's actually been termed, the 200 billion euro, as a defense shield against the weaponization of energy. And I think the fractiousness comes when you read what Thierry Breton and Paolo Gentiloni wrote in the Frankfurter Allgemeine this morning, comes from a certain apprehension, of the fact that Germany is actually capable of drawing on capital markets for 200 billion euros, while other countries with higher debt levels are not. And I think that's an EU issue, a single market issue that affects sort of the level of competitiveness inside the union and the issue of the level playing field. And as we speak, the ECOFIN is meeting, And I'm sure they're going to have a very intense discussion about this. But I believe what one should also keep in mind is that much of what comes into Germany serves to help households, SMEs, smaller companies, but it also helps to provide our Speicher, our storage facilities that other European nations can draw on. And so therefore, I think the jury is still out on whether it's going to be a fractious move or one that will actually enhance Europe's energy security.
Are we in danger of leaving other European nations with smaller budgets behind?
No, the issue is not whether you have a smaller budget or not. The issue is how high your debt level is. If you are already head over heels in debt, you have a problem drawing on capital markets for additional funds. And I think that's the issue. And this is, I think, the issue that's being discussed right now in, I think it's Luxembourg or Brussels. And when you read Breton and Gentiloni very closely, what you read is an appeal for a European mechanism, a European solidarity mechanism, which is fine by me personally. But of course, the suggestion is to do it via mutualization of debt. And the mutualization of debt is something that we've done in SURE, but which has been considered very exceptional, extremely exceptional. Next Generation also a portion. And so I don't see a willingness in the German government or other governments to go down that road in the energy situation.
Monica, I'd like you to weigh on this one, because obviously Poland is in a different dynamic. They are trying desperately to wean themselves off of coal and move into new energies, into cleaner forms of energy, but at the same point, ensure that you don't have energy insecurity. Where are you today?
Well, I probably wouldn't frame it as desperately trying, because this has not been a fully consensual issue among Polish politicians, getting off coal, especially now that, in fact, coal, the domestic coal that goes to power plants does provide energy security and does provide actually for the fact that Poland has lower power prices than the rest of Europe currently. So the picture is now more mixed, but I think going forward, I think there is a big understanding that to build resilience against any future shocks, we need to do two things. Invest heavily in energy efficiency and in renewable energy. And these two things, they will not help for the coming winter, maybe not even for the next winter, because there is a longer lead time to some of the investments, but this is the only two things that we can do, that we will be more resilient against any future crisis. And actually there are very good signs in Poland this year and last year. Heat pumps were growing at the fastest rate among all European countries in Poland. Photovoltaic, PV, rooftop solar has been growing very fast over the last 2 years. So there are very positive signs. Offshore wind will come along in just a few years. So I think, within a matter of 8 to 10 years, we'll see more than 50% of power coming from renewable energy sources in Poland, which is a very good way forward. And if we can tackle the issue of having firm capacities still there, instead of the coal capacities, which is not that obvious, what should replace them with? Because normally we were saying gas is the transitional fuel away from coal. Well, now it's kind of tricky to treat gas as transitional fuel. What I'm saying always, let's treat gas as transitional capacities, because we will have some gas plants, but they will not be running all the time. They will be using less gas because they will be just for balancing the peaks.
You were mentioning the prospect of a long, cold winter. We've seen the weather reports, at least so far. God forbid that is the case, but where is Poland in that mix in terms of your situation? Because at this point, I understand that the government is looking to tax the windfall profits on energy companies to make up for that deficit for folks at home. But at the same point, you could run into serious problems.
Well, again, so the issue of power prices is not as acute in Poland as elsewhere. That's the first point. Of course, it's still very, very worrying, and any government would have a really big problem allowing these costs to be passed on to the households and industries. So windfall profit tax is one of the ways to deal with that, of course, and it will be used. I'm sure of that, and that's understandable and sensible in this situation that we are in. The second point would be again, government debt or raising other taxes. There's no other possibility. We have really very few instruments available to us. The good thing is that Polish economy has been growing very fast, and the recovery, post-COVID recovery, was also one of the, if not the biggest or the strongest in Europe. So there is, there is some leeway in public finances, in the general economy that allows this shock to be absorbed, hopefully, if it does not go on and on for 5 years.
Victoria, speaking of shocks being absorbed, when you look at the energy mix in Ukraine today, one of the things that I've spoken to with the CEO of Naftogaz, for example, as well as the CEO of DTEC, is the move beyond gas to nuclear, for example. There's been an ability in Ukraine over the last several years to really lean into that. Do you see that as continuing?
Well, the discussion on the energy mix, the perfect energy mix for Ukraine and for specific countries in Europe in general, I think it is a discussion that we need to have right now and have strategies to implement our visions. And it should be our common vision, because we see ourselves to be part of European Union, and we can start, and we have already started to be part of the energy system of European Union ENTSO-E already prior to the full-scale invasion. It was one of the first major steps. And we see ourselves to be one of the key players in European energy market, having, for example, quite substantial capacity of our nuclear power plants, although with them, as you're all aware, we right now have, with the specific ones, quite a challenge, which is not just a challenge for Ukraine, by the way. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant situation, the terrorist occupation of Russian Federation of this particular plant, first in history of humankind, which is completely outrageous. But coming back to your question, nuclear having a great, actually, not just the capacity, the human power, the technologies. They already built a relationship with our Western allies. For example, we were on the way to completely switch from using Russian nuclear fuel to the American from Westinghouse. It's one of the examples of our cooperation. Also, small modular reactors is also on our pipeline as part of the vision for Ukraine. But we also need to remember that having one of the biggest gas transportation pipelines that is still used for transit of Russian gas to Europe, it can be, and we hope it will be, one of the key assets for nitrogen, for green nitrogen, and our storage capacities could be used for that purpose as well. And this is when we have discussions with our colleagues from Germany. I think this is where we share our common vision that this is the way to go forward. So indeed, to sum up to your question, nuclear is the future. Peaceful nuclear, secured nuclear, because we haven't even touched on that issue yet. And I believe that the whole world should start thinking how to protect nuclear power stations from any attempts of being attacked or used by terrorists, like Russia in our case, or any other terrorists. So nuclear is the
invasion of Ukraine essentially shown you that you can't protect them?
The situation in Ukraine is the situation of full-scale war against our country. And indeed, it shows that the measures of protection that we had and were the ones that met all the regulatory requirements, not just set up by Ukraine, but by international institutions, including IAEA, International Atomic Agency. They are not enough. And by the way, let's not forget, when it comes to Atomic Agency, they don't have an instruction what to do in case if atomic nuclear power station is attacked by terrorists. What to do, whether there should be like a common task force formed at the UN level or any other level to act not as a mean to release the nuclear power station from the terrorists capturing it, but actually moving forward beforehand to protect the nuclear power plant, to protect the area around it? What sort of other measures should be installed around nuclear power plants in order not to be a target of shelling? And this is what is happening right now on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and not just that one, but
what
the other one too.
What is the response then to those who would say, and sorry to interrupt you, but what is the response to those who would say in the EU and beyond that these are essentially insurmountable problems at the end of the day? I mean, you're never going to be able to foolproof a nuclear plant, so why invest in them?
I don't buy it, I'm sorry, but I think protecting critical infrastructure, and critical infrastructure has become a mean of attack by Russia, and Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, for example, is one of the examples. And the cyber attacks, by the way, we should remember about them, that Russia used against power generating plants in Ukraine in the past and in some other countries. It's just, it's a chain of examples that actually have to make the politicians and people responsible for making decisions about the security of energy infrastructure really come together and come up with a comprehensive plan how to secure our infrastructure, energy infrastructure, critical infrastructure, because we are all at risk. That's most important.
Alexander, weigh in on this in the sense that never more so, perhaps, certainly in the 20th century, but in the 21st century, have we ever seen a situation where energy security literally equals national security? And Germany's heard that and learned that the hard way.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in Germany has pursued and I'm putting this nicely, naive energy policy over the last 20 years. Victoria and I just spoke about it. I mean, the idea of using Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were increasing our dependence on Russia for many years, for 15, 20 years, even after 2014. Even after the annexation of Crimea, our gas imports from Russia even increased. This naivete is completely gone. I mean, it's gone out the window. It's been a shock to our system.
Well, when Donald Trump can say, "I told you so."
Well, we don't listen to Donald Trump as much as we listen to the Poles and the Balts now, which I think is a very good development, because Poland has been right about this, Ukraine has been right about this, the Baltic nations have all been right about this. I mean, diplomatically, looking at it diplomatically, looking back for a minute now, bear with me just 1 minute. Diplomatically, Germany has not been isolated on any issue as pervasively as on the energy issue. I mean, the Scandinavians, the French, the European Parliament, the US Congress, mind you, both parties in the US Congress, they don't agree on anything, but they agreed on the idea that Nord Stream was a stupid idea. And it was. And now this is something that we have recognized, that we did not have energy sovereignty, we did not have energy security, and that means we didn't have national sovereignty or national security. And we are now scrambling in what the Chancellor has termed the Zeitenwende. The Zeitenwende, the turning of the times, has been understood as a military term, which is true. I mean, we are investing in our armed forces in an unprecedented manner. We are supplying arms to Ukraine and to a war zone, which has been completely anathema to the German body politic. But it's also a Zeitenwende in terms of European solidarity when it comes to energy. And it's been a Zeitenwende in terms of, going back, for example, to nuclear now. We have a very, interesting government coalition containing the Green Party, which has been created on the idea of getting out of nuclear. And now we're keeping 3 nuclear plants, at least 2 for the moment, but most likely 3, online. We're reusing our coal plants just to secure the situation for the winter. And the perspective, the longer term perspective, is where Monica has been. It's of course renewables. My question as someone who's looking at the landscape is, will renewables be alone in and of themselves? Will nuclear continue to play a role? Possibly not inside Germany, because our society is still mostly skeptical about nuclear. But of course we'll be buying electricity from France.
But how much is that the fault of policymakers in not explaining to people what the realities of the situation are, whether it be green energy, or whether it be fossil fuels, and the fact that within a transition, which is not going to happen tomorrow, you need to have both?
Well, that's what's happening now. I mean, for gas, and the German debate, right? Gas has been the transition fossil fuel, that it's been termed as a transition fossil fuel. If you look at the numbers, that's not been the case, really. Germany is far ahead on renewables. We're very good on renewables, but whether we will be able to sustain our industrial base with renewables alone, I think is an open question. And that's something that policymakers need to explain, but we have to rely on the media to get the message across. And socially and in the media. Of course, we always rely on you, Ellie. And there the message has been very clear. Nuclear is dangerous, let's get out of nuclear. Coal is dirty, let's get out of coal. And so the result has been a naive dependency on Russia that is now really, has experienced a massive shock. And that shock is felt in the body politic throughout, and changes are coming, new explanations are coming, and we have now a Green Minister of Economic Affairs who's keeping nuclear power plants online, which is remarkably not easy for him, in all fairness.
Truth. And I mean, when you have 20 to 30 years of a certain policy narrative, it's very hard to put the brakes on that, no doubt, and change the messaging. Monica, you have a not quite similar issue here in Poland. We talked a little bit about the coal dynamic, but when you take a step back and think about the level of investment that it's going to need for Poland's energy diversification, and where you think you're going to get those investments, whether they be from international organizations, from other countries, where do you see the availability or the opportunity for investors?
Well, the beauty of investing in energy efficiency solutions and renewables is that these investments tend to be distributed and more financed by the private sector, and easier to do, basically. With the exception of offshore wind, which is a very big capex outlays needed, and these investments need big investors. All the rest is really up to the private sector. And we did not have a shortage of willing investors in the past few years. There was more investors willing and more capital inflows to Poland willing to invest in renewables than there were projects available, because the permitting was the issue, because of the famous law on limiting onshore wind expansion was in place. So we had a limit on eligible projects and not a limit of willing investors. So there's no, I have absolutely no issue with we will not be able to attract capital for these investments. We will. And the second point is that these investments will not cause energy prices to rise. We are way past the point in time when Germany started to invest heavily in renewables in 2010, 11, 12, that was the biggest growth of photovoltaics in Germany. These were really, really expensive sources back then, 10 years ago. But since then, the cost dropped by 90%. So it's now, I've been saying for a few years now, Poland used to always say in the European debate, we cannot afford, we Polish people, we cannot afford to invest in renewables. They're too expensive. We are still, in a fairly, poorer country than the rest of the Europe. So these are your toys, and we will stick to our coal because it's the cheapest. And it completely changed in the past few years. And now we can no longer say we cannot afford to invest in renewables. Instead, we have to say we cannot afford not to invest in renewables, because this is our future. And maybe coming back to the nuclear issue, of course, and I sympathize with what Victoria has said about the Ukraine energy mix. In Poland, there is a big discussion, of course, as well, and actually a decision by the government to go the nuclear path, and it's easier said than done, of course. And that's the biggest problem. I think the biggest problem with new nuclear projects, is how long it takes to build them. Because I absolutely think, I have a very strong opinion that it was not a very good decision to close the perfectly stable running power plants in Germany. And now it's a tragedy that we have now that Germany is, putting online coal plants that were mothballed before, instead of keeping more nuclear open. That's, from the climate perspective, is just a terrible idea, really. Of course, I understand the societal view might be different, but it's shifting, and quite rapidly, I think, this year. We've seen opinion polls that show that maybe the majority of Germans actually now support nuclear power.
Even the majority
Greens,
of supporters
probably.
of the Green Party
exactly, yes.
support
right.
keeping nuclear plants online. And that's really quite remarkable.
Yeah, because as much as it's difficult to invest in new nuclear, once you already have it, And by the way, you will have it for the next how many years? You will have the spent fuel there. Even if you close them down, it's not like you are out of nuclear power system, because you still have the spent fuel at these sites. Before you build the long-term storage, it will take another 20 years at least. Maybe more. There's not even a location chosen in Germany.
And you can also reuse this used nuclear waste in the future, because the technologies are developing.
Yeah, but they will be also probably in the next 10 to 20 years developed, not sooner. It's just a very long lead times. That's the longest, technology with the longest lead times for investment, for operation, and for decommissioning that we can.
And it's a tough one when you have short-term election cycles. With every new leadership coming in, having a different vision and a plan. It's something, of course, that we see in the United States. Most recently, the difference between the Trump administration versus the Biden administration in terms of their outlook for energy. But I want to take a step back and just ask you to weigh in on this one, which is how fascinating that this conflict has brought into very sharp focus, as I say, energy security equaling national security. And we're sitting here at a military and defense conference essentially talking about the elephant that's been in the room and is now at the very forefront of everything, which is that if you don't have energy, you cannot make your economy run, which means you cannot make your industry run, which means people lose their jobs, and there is no fight for liberalism, freedom, and democracy. So when you think about that more broadly, how do you believe that energy is going to have to now factor into defense strategies? Because you got to remember that Lloyd Austin, the Defense Secretary of the United States, said as one of his initial pillars that climate change was one of the things he was most worried about, and he felt that renewables and green energy were the way to go. But now we're back on the back foot, if you will, in a sense, because as though we know that renewables have to be a big part of the energy dynamic going forward, we know that there's a transition to getting there. If you want to weigh in on that, Victoria.
It's definitely a very general question, and I believe that energy should be just the first pillar on which any democracy builds its security, development, and policies around it. But I also want to tell you that while discussing those bigger issues, right now in Ukraine we're facing situations where Russia is targeting specifically power plants, heating power plants, other objects of critical infrastructure. And they're trying to achieve one simple objective, is to make as many Ukrainians, as many towns and cities uninhabitable as possible. So when Western countries, developed countries, think about their vision and when they're prioritizing what is most important for securing democracy, I think you need to look at the example of what is happening right now in Ukraine to realize the importance of energy and critical infrastructure being the core of viability and the core of any society, of any country being able to live. And it's so important, I think, for all of us to finally make the conclusion, to learn the lesson that democratic world cannot afford feeding the autocracies, cannot afford giving their own money to the countries that are aggressors, that have proven to be aggressors. That in case of Russia, come on, haven't we learned our lesson from 2008 invasion of Georgia? Why haven't we learned that lesson then? Why we haven't reacted, or you as a developed world, I would say, to annexation of Crimea, to Syria? You kept on increasing your dependence from Russia when it comes to energy resources. You haven't even thought about cutting it significantly and moving from the aggressor, moving from the regime that was actually exploiting your weakness, which is your strength. It's the market economy, it's the democratic institutions, it's everything, the foundations that you've built, but you've built it on the notion of using all of those instruments for the benefit of all. And Russia was exploiting it for benefiting itself and making itself stronger, to be actually I would say, cynical towards the developed world, European countries, Germany also in particular, right? You remember when the whole idea of Nord Stream 1 and then Nord Stream 2 came up, when Russia was saying, well, you see, Ukraine is an unreliable partner. Guess what? Now Scholz is saying that Russia is an unreliable partner, and we will not use those Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines to supply the gas to Europe and to Germany.
Secure energy has to be a part of a defense strategy for every country.
Secure should be number one, because I'm sorry, but in the modern world, you cannot have cities, towns, countries without electricity and heat and gas in certain cases in their own homes, right? It's just impossible. So it's the foundation on which all modern societies and countries build.
Alexander, what happens next from an EU level, in your opinion?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know what the EU's bodies will decide. We'll have the ECOFIN, we have the European Council coming days. But I think there's a number of issues that I think should be decided. One is, of course, the issue of supply security. We should be able to secure enough energy to get through the winter with warm apartments and with a functioning economy. That's number one. Number two, supply expansion. We need to expand the supply of electricity in particular in order to get the price down. That's absolutely crucial, because right now prices are so high that many people are panicking. I just come from a conference with a number of German SMEs, trading people, who say, listen, I mean, the mayor of Berlin is talking about the fact that possibly, 2 to 3 hours of blackout every day aren't a big problem. And they would go like, are we crazy? Are we going mad? I mean, what does it mean? It means no payment systems. It means no cooling. It means, it's crazy. It's something that really we need to expand the supply to get prices down, because many companies are in a really significantly difficult situation. And the third element when it comes to supply is supply solidarity. So inside the European Union, what we have done now, because the French nuclear power plants are underperforming right now massively, and so Germany has used the little gas that we bought to generate electricity to send it to France. And I think that's the way we need to continue to work together. So it's really security, expansion and solidarity, and then moving to the demand side, demand reduction. So don't heat your apartments to the same level that you heated last winter, just carelessly because gas was simply there. It no longer is. It's a scarce resource. And I think that's a message that we are getting across to the population right now. In Germany, I can say companies have really made an effort to save energy, really made an effort. For households, it's a bit more difficult, and we're still trying to get that message across.
I spoke to the CEO of Uniper just a month ago in Milan, and this was after his second bailout by the German government. Now we have nationalization. Do you see that we're going to see more power companies and smaller size companies being bailed out by the German government, or perhaps nationalized? I mean, what does this look like in your view in the realistic terms? I mean, if we're talking about potential blackouts in Berlin.
Yeah, exactly. No, I don't have a realistic scenario. My hopeful scenario is that we will have enough gas to get through the winter. We will have enough gas for utilities to send to households and companies. Possibly at higher, well, certainly at higher prices than before. The price is coming down slowly. It's still high, but it's coming down slowly. And so I don't want to see blackouts. I don't think that's a realistic scenario. I don't think it's a scenario that an industrialized nation like Germany can afford. We have too many processes that demand on a continuous supply of energy, be it heat or electricity. And therefore, I think what we will see is a European effort supported, of course, obviously by Germany to ensure the security of supply. And I think that's what we're aiming for. And then come March, April next year, with milder temperatures, we'll be in a better situation to prepare for the next winter.
I'm just weighing on this for me, Monica, because I think about this from the perspective of the United States. And we're talking about the U.S. having spent billions already in terms of helping the Ukrainian war effort, in terms of propping up various European nations. Poland's been a recipient of U.S. dollars. Does the U.S. have to expect to do more, considering the energy crisis Europe is in today?
I always have a faith in the U.S. U.S. people are very savvy businessmen. So it's not, it's not charity work to be honest. So I think it's, helping Europe is now basically good business for America, so it will continue and it will be more. For sure, I have no doubt of that. And but I would like to come back maybe for a little bit on your point on energy security being an element of defense or strategy or country security, because this is a really crucial point, and I'm not a defense expert. I would really love to hear from people around this conference about that, but I suspect that the defense sector will now be turning a more watchful eye on the energy sector and maybe thinking that, yes, we need to move out of these centralized energy systems because they, as you pointed out, are vulnerable to attacks and to disruption. So if we, it's much easier to attack 1,000 megawatt big power plant than 1,000 power plants that are 1 megawatt each, right? So if we're going to this distributed generation more and more, energy communities, homes being almost self-sufficient with the rooftop panel and things like that. So I think, and this will be building more resilience in the whole defense system and the whole economy. And also I think, this year is really a perfect storm when it comes to energy security in all dimensions, because we have historically in Europe, I think we have not talked enough and done enough about energy security. So the climate agenda was always at the forefront, rightly so, but the energy security was a little bit like taken for granted. We will have it always, we don't have to worry about it. And now, when you have the biggest European economy discussing possible rolling blackouts, that tells you something went wrong in Europe, because we now have a perfect storm in all dimensions. In the short term, with the grid operators struggling to balance the grid day to day, minute to minute. In the midterm, when we are thinking, okay, so what we will replace our coal capacities, nuclear capacities once we close them with. In the fuel supply security, in the physical security, and last but not least, economic security, because security dimension of energy is also the economic security. If we cannot afford to pay for this energy, that means we are not energy secure.
So I have a few minutes left, and I just want to get your sense, in terms of that holistic approach, where should we put in the concentration? And I'm talking about concentration of investment. Is it in securing the grid? Is it in creating more dialogue between various nations when it comes to your energy dynamics in terms of the mix? Where does the challenge lie that has to be dealt with immediately? Victoria.
I think when it comes to European Union, the challenge lies in forming the common vision of the energy mix, and therefore which also will include the solutions for not just where to get the sources of energy, where they will be used, how they will be used. It's also the grids. It's also about developing green projects. It's also about going into new technologies. It's also about developing the prosumer segment, where you have the one who generates the energy is also is a consumer of energy. So it's all together, and it's a big task. And unless European Union sits together and comes up with this whole joint vision, then we will see more and more challenges coming to different parts of European Union, and it can pose a threat to unanimity of the countries within the EU.
So a common vision from the EU.
It's the common vision.
Well, in the short term, as a politician, I would say it's very simple. Keep the apartments warm during winter for people to be able to actually, stay healthy. And keep our businesses running to generate the jobs and the tax revenue that we need to, have a satisfied population. That's I think, the very immediate short-term need. And that's why, for example, you have the Zeitenwende discussion with coal plants that had been mothballed coming back online, nuclear power plants, staying online. That's the immediate and short-term thing, managing this winter. The medium term is to have a very honest discussion. Where is our vision? Where does the vision, in terms of the energy mix, will actually lead us? I can speak for the German body politic there. It's very much renewables. Everybody is now behind renewables in a sense that had not been there because we took energy for granted. It's absolutely true. There was the climate agenda, but nobody talked about energy security, not in a relevant manner, at least. And in the longer term, then it will be, of course, to manage the transition to a CO2-free energy generation landscape. And that is going to be interesting, particularly from the German perspective, because our country is strongly committed to the renewable agenda, but we're still extremely ambivalent, to put it mildly, when it comes to nuclear. And we hear from Monica that there's a renaissance about to come in Poland. Ukraine is using nuclear energy. The French are nearly using nuclear energy nearly exclusively. So we're a little bit an island in the middle. And for me, it's going to be interesting to see how we will actually, continue to live on that island, because frankly speaking, I think we will have a new debate on this very issue of nuclear energy in the future.
Monica.
Yeah, I think both in short and mid-term, what Europe needs to be doing much more than has been doing so far is investing in energy efficiency and in saving energy, basically. Right now, many European countries have these informational campaign how you can save energy. But looking at the policies and the measures introduced, most of the measures introduced, the relief packages, deal with the prices only. So it's like treating a patient for the symptoms, but not treating the real cause of the disease. So we are using too much energy, and we have too little coming in. So there is this imbalance between demand and supply, and we need to, as quickly as possible, rebalance this demand-supply situation. So both in very short term, immediate term, in this winter, saving energy wherever we can, and midterm, really investing in a more systemic approach to energy efficiency, so insulating homes and things like that. I've been asked recently about somebody that whether I think that Poland should be doubling down on coal mining, because there's a shortage of coal in Poland and elsewhere, so we should be scrambling to get some investments into mines as quickly as possible to get more coal. And I said, no, what you need to be doing, you should be investing, yes, but in ways how to need less coal for heating homes, for producing electricity. So this is where you should be investing, not in new coal supply, but rather thinking how to reduce the demand. And especially in Poland, we are before the winter yet. If we were here 2 months from now, you would probably go outside of this nice hotel and smell the air, which would be really dirty. Because of homes being heated by individual coal boilers, and it's just not acceptable anymore. And this is the priority all around Europe. The priority should be definitely energy efficiency, energy savings as much as possible.
I like the analogy with the patient. Right now, my impression is that it's really a very good image. Our energy systems are like in the ambulance, on the way to the hospital, and the doctors are desperately trying to keep them alive, for them to arrive in the hospital. That's what I mean by the short term. The very short term is really keep the system going, keep people in warm apartments, and keep our energy, keep our businesses working. This is not a beautiful sight. It's not something that is perfect or a long-term thing. It's really getting our systems through the winter in that ambulance, and then we can discuss about a thorough cure and rehabilitation afterwards.
Just one comment. Since I had many discussions with your colleagues about the coming winter and this whole notion that everyone is afraid that people in Germany will freeze, every time when they hear such a statement, I could just tell a very short story. During the first days of full-scale invasion, Russians shelled a city called Chernihiv. It's up north from Kiev, and over 700 people died there. 300 of them, they basically froze to death because they were in shelters where there was no electricity, no heat, nothing. So while for Germany it's hypothetical, for anyone in Europe, issue of freezing to death, for Ukrainians it's the reality. So please remember about that.
Tomorrow I'm going to be in Vienna, where OPEC Plus is widely expected to cut as much as 1 million barrels per day of oil production. Does this, in your mind, hurt the cause of democracy in Europe? And by that I mean Ukraine's fight against Russia. Yes or no?
Who's going to cut? We didn't get that.
In your mind, is it a mistake for OPEC Plus to cut 1 million barrels per day?
Well, I mean, anything that limits the supply right now and has a tendency to increase prices is going to hurt the system. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And so I would consider it a mistake, yes, from the European perspective, certainly.
Monica.
As I said, we have a shortage of energy in Europe. We have more demand than we have supply. So anything that helps to rebalance the situation is good. And I think that exacerbates the problem is clearly not favorable to Europe. And but again, our response so far has been not that bad in terms of reducing demand during this year. And actually, for example, for gas, we have been able to rebalance the market, meaning we still have enough gas in Europe because we reduced the demand, and of course we diversified via LNG terminals, and we are waiting for new ones to come online very shortly.
Victoria.
For me, it seems like OPEC is just playing the play according to the script written in Kremlin. In December, the full embargo on oil is coming to in force in Europe. So it's, of course, for the benefit of Kremlin. And it's a direct hello from those who make decisions what is the future and security in Europe when it comes to energy sector.
Panelists, we have to leave it there. Energy and security in Europe. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for staying with us for this last panel of the discussion. And we talk a lot about traps, difficulties, challenges. So maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and we will be talking about nuclear energy. And it was interesting to hear in the last panel and previous panels also, many expressing hopes that nuclear could be part of the solution, again part of the solution for European energy security and our climate equation. It's a new discussion, a relatively new discussion, as we hear also voices from biggest opponent country, Germany. Mr. Lambsdorff expressed himself in favor. So it's interesting to see that there is a discussion ongoing, there is a revival of interest around nuclear energy. So let me right now turn to the last panel of this Warsaw Security Forum Energy and Climate track, where we will exactly talk about nuclear as part of our strategic autonomy, or is it the source of new dependencies? And I warmly welcome Wojciech Jakubik, well-known Polish author, journalist, and also somebody who has spent a lot of time discussing and talking and convincing for nuclear in Poland. Wojtek, the floor is yours for running this exceptional panel.
ladies and gentlemen. Let's have a seat. Let's have another interesting discussion on energy security, this time nuclear power, especially in the context of security autonomy on one hand and supply dependence on the other, as it is written here. So that should be true. About the topic of our discussion, my name is Wojciech Jakubik. I'm writing on energy for a decade, and I'm especially devoted to energy security approach when it comes to journalism works, and I'm really interested about our discussion about nuclear energy, especially in the specific context of what's happening in Ukraine, in Zaporizhia occupied nuclear power plant on the one hand, but on the other hand in Poland, because we are on the verge of decision. With whom will we build the nuclear power plant? I hope we will, and we'll make this decision. So I would like to introduce Mr. Mateusz Berger, who is the government plenipotentiary for strategic energy infrastructure in Poland. Big applause, of course. We have a distinguished guest from Canada, Mr. Stephen Dion, who is the Prime Minister's Special Envoy in EU and Europe. He was also the Minister of Foreign Affairs in 2015 to 17 and chair of COP11. Great to have you here, sir. And we have Agnieszka Kaźmierczak, who is the Director General inside Euratom, which is energy supply, nuclear supply agency in Europe, as we all know. So, as I spoke, great to have you here. Let's start with our Canadian guest. I would ask about this tension that we've heard about in previous panel between the climate and security. There are multiple questions about nuclear energy, especially right now. We are looking for security autonomy in Europe, but there are fears. So what's the Canadian take on it?
Thank you very much, Mr. Jakubik. Thank you, everyone. So the question is, what is the view of Canada about nuclear? There's military and civil. And Canada think we need to dissociate the two completely to be sure we'll not have a proliferation. That's very key. On military, we all want a world without nuclear weapons. But the issue is, should it be done unilaterally by NATO or in a concerted way through the existing agreements and treaties? Of course, Canada is of the view that it cannot be done unilaterally, but it's clear that we should never use weapons of this kind anymore. It should be done in a concerted way through our treaties, and Canada is pushing for a fissile cutoff treaty for years. We hope everybody will support us for that. It would be a great help. We should condemn, the whole world should condemn the threat of President Putin to use nuclear weapons. That's something I think should not be even under discussion, should be a universal commitment to fight it. About civil nuclear, Canada think is part of the energy mix. We need to do it properly. We need to do it with a lot of security. It's 10%, 15% of our electricity mix in Canada, and it's very safe. And we are ready to offer to the world the possibility to be less dependent on Russian source of nuclear energy. We are a top producer of uranium. We have a strong technology, the CANDU reactor. SMRs will be a leader of the world. We had a mission in Poland only last week to see what we can do in Poland to support Poland in your nuclear ambitions, and it's something in which we believe. About climate change, we think nuclear should be part of the solution, is the view of the IPCC, is the view of the International Energy Agency. If we try to do it without nuclear and only with renewables, it's technically possible, but it will be awfully more costly, very much more complicated to cope with the intermittency of these sources of energy. So I have the numbers to discuss with you, but I think it's very clear that nuclear should be part of a solution if we want to be carbon neutral for 2050, which is a very demanding goal.
Thank you. I have just one supplementary question about the Polish-Canadian cooperation in IAEA when it comes to Zaporizhia blackmailing with nuclear energy by Russia. What's your take on this?
Well, the take of it is that Canada and Poland led a resolution in order to be sure that this would be condemned. And I'm very pleased of this partnership with Poland. It has been accepted. So we need to support all the efforts that are done to be sure that this war will not create a nuclear catastrophe.
And I think we all sign under this appeal. So let's move to European Commission, to Euratom, and to Ms. Kazimierczak, who could speak some more about this supply issue, because we have an obvious supply issue when it comes to natural gas. We see that there is one dominant supplier which is not providing the supply as it was to provide, and it brings us to a conclusion: we need to change something. Is the nuclear energy a part of the solution in the context of nuclear fuel supply, which is a concern of Euratom?
Perhaps I'll start by a small disclaimer, because I am speaking here on behalf of the Euratom Supply Agency and not on behalf of the European Commission.
Yeah, Euratom is inside.
Euratom is sort of satellite to the European Union, so the same member states are as members of the EU. However, the agency is independent. It is under the political supervision of the Commission, but it acts fully independently, and in that sense I'm not speaking for the European Commission. But indeed, it is our mission. It has been for 62 years now to ensure security of supply of nuclear materials and nuclear fuel in Europe. So far successful, as we, the market has been changing over 60 years. But what we can see now is really a change of the paradigm in the market. And we can already now see that we have seen it for many years, that the nuclear fuel cycle in the EU, but also outside the EU, is very much dependent on Russians. Uranium is abundant. There is a lot of uranium that could be mined outside of Russia. Russia is currently providing 25% of uranium for Euratom. But it is abundant. We have already started talking to Canada to see the possibility of opening the mines that are put in current maintenance there, but that could really be reopened. And so this is not the bottleneck. Mm-hmm. The bottleneck happens later. In order to produce nuclear fuel, you have to go through a process of conversion, then enriching uranium, and then fuel fabrication.
So who is converting that?
And this is exactly the good question. Currently in the EU, 25% of uranium is converted by Russia. And that is now looking into future. That doesn't look a lot. 25% is not a lot. But if we were to replace Russian and possibly even Chinese conversion services, that would take at least 7 years from the decision to invest. Because there is no capacity in the West. Why? Because since 1990s, the Russians have been dumping conversion services. And it didn't make economical sense to invest in conversion capacity in Europe, but also in the US. The conversion capacity is actually only now being put back to reach the nameplate capacity. So this has been a bit of a conscious hybrid attack on to ensure that Russia keeps the stake in the conversion.
So what you say is that they did it on purpose. They were not looking at market, but they were looking at their foreign and security agenda goals, and they used the nuclear dependence.
That has been very clear to us. I mean, I'm referring you to the reports of the Euratom Supply Agency that has been repeating that year over year. Further, enrichment is not such a problem. The problem is also the last stage, which is the fuel fabrication. And it is a problem for a small group of reactors that are Russian design reactors, so-called VVR reactors. And this is where it is also another example where Russians were preventing alternative fuel from being used in those reactors through multiple measures that were again very low pricing, but also changing technology of the nuclear fuel. Nuclear fuel is engineered product. I mean, it's something that is not like aviation fuel. And they were changing the technology in order to prevent the new entrants. And the new entrants are only now trying to make it. Westinghouse from the US or Framatome from France. But this has been this is a story that will continue in the coming years.
Especially during the discussion about the nuclear sanctions on Russia, because Rosatom was one of the options as a target for EU sanctions, and it is not targeted yet. So this dependence might have an impact on this discussion, right?
I mean, the sanctions. Sanctions are a political decision, but sanction on Rosatom that would have immediate effect would very much undermine the security of supply of nuclear electricity, and it's nuclear electricity that will really be defining what the speakers in the previous panel called the geopolitical winter, and then the next geopolitical winter. So there is perhaps a space to build strong alternative supply, to have the capacity to fully replace, but to do it in a staged way, because otherwise we could be creating a crisis on our own.
So Poland is not having this issue because it is not having the nuclear power plant yet. It's not good that we don't have it, but we are willing to have it in 2033. The first reactor should be ready in line with our program in 2033, and the government is in front of this decision with whom to build the nuclear power plant. Mr. Berger, could you elaborate a bit on this, what we've just heard about this importance of nuclear energy from our Polish perspective? Why do we need it for?
Thank you very much. As European Union, we have set the ambition to becoming the first climate-neutral continent. So we know how much important it is to search through all the solutions that can help us with this ambition. We are, as government, we are in front of making a very huge decision, and I think in a few weeks we can make it public, and I'm really cross my fingers to do it as soon as is possible, because there are many aspects of the moment of this decision. First of all, I think there would be never that much understandable in the society to make this decision, because as we know, as we can see in Germany, some other countries, nuclear is still sometimes it occurs fear. But I think now, due to the situation of the cruelty of Russia, I think this fear can be a little bit less than what we can see every day in television. So I think also due to all the regulatory obligations, but I mean also some public aid aspects, this is a very good time for Poland to negotiate the terms, how much we can need European help, because without a system of support, we will not have never nuclear power in Poland.
Okay, so you need to have some agreement inside with EC on how to finance the nuclear program in Poland, and they need to agree on some financing scheme, right?
I think financing is always the key issue, because when it's not a business issue, because this kind of investments without a public aid, it's not a business case. The business case comes later, but when you start it, when you have to have this kind of capex, when you have to go to the bank, you have to show something. And when your capex is planned for like 15 years, it's not like typical business issue. So I think there is now, after our decision with the Ministry of Energy, we have to discuss about the system of support. And I think it's a great opportunity to also discuss the system of support, not only for this huge investment, but also for SMRs, because I think we can treat it in common. Because I think after Polish decision about establishing, the first site of nuclear, we need to develop surrounding for nuclear energy, but I mean also nuclear resources, nuclear knowledge, academics, and so on, to transform all the aspects that we need, also supply chain. We need a decision first.
Okay, so what about the cooperation with Canada? Could we cooperate, for example, on nuclear fuel together?
I think it's maybe here a place for you, but I know that some of the Polish state-held companies already start joint cooperation, so I think there is a lot of surface.
Mr. Dion?
I think the world will not be less dependent to Russia without Canada. We are not the only solution, but we are a key one. I have some numbers of the 31 reactors that begin construction since 2017. All but 4 are of Russian or Chinese design. So that's the situation now. Russia controls, as you said, 43% of the world enrichment capacity. So we don't want to be dependent of the Russian regime for very valid reasons. We have this challenge. And Canada needs to be part of the solution. We're fully aware of that. It's why we came in Poland last week with a delegation, and we discussed not only nuclear plants with the CANDU reactors that we have around the world, not only the SMRs, where Canada needs to be a leader of the world, but also other services we may offer, like development and training in nuclear skills, robotics will be very key, nano filters, nuclear-grade pipes, cables, and so on. So Poland is interested to have MOU with us. We'll work on that, and we'll do it with a lot of countries around the world. But we don't want to overcommit. We cannot be a solution overnight.
Yeah.
This will take time. SMRs will not be ready before 2028 about.
Yeah.
But at this very moment, we'll be very strong.
So Ms. Kazimierczak was speaking about 7 years of getting rid of this dependence. What's your take on it? 7 years in Europe or more?
Well, it's about the same for LNGs. It's about the same for hydrogen. Canada will be the solution for all of that. But don't ask us to deliver for this winter. That's something we cannot.
And the winter, geopolitical winter is coming.
And one of the reasons is because as long as Europe was buying cheap Russian gas, it was very difficult for Canada to compete.
Yeah, because it was cheap then, and now we see how cheap it really is. Ms. Kazimierczak, you wanted to add something on that?
In the EU, in Euratom, we are dependent 31% on enrichment from Russia. So it's slightly lower, but we also are, a lot of European industry that could actually make it up. But if we are talking about a solution that should be open for the supply chain of nuclear fuel for the open world, meaning excluding Russia and China, the first thing we should be doing is to sit together and analyze the situation and have the shared assessment of what would be the needs and what is the capacity of the open world to in the nuclear fuel cycle. And this sort of shared analysis is advocated by Euratom Supply Agency and the European Commission. We have already had very satisfactory talks to Canada's government about that, but it would also need to include other big players, which is the US, the UK, South Korea, Japan, Australia. So that would be the that sort of assessment, I think, is necessary so that we do not start planning using the capacity and stealing it between ourselves, so that we actually that could be the signal that could be given to the industry. This is how much will be needed in the years to come, in 7 years, in 10 years, so that they can also take their investment decisions based.
They need to be sure.
Based on that, they need to be sure. And there is currently the prices went up prices for conversion and for enrichment went up. Quite understandably. So there is a lot of hesitance in the market currently. And we think that sort of shared assessment and a harmonized solution would be the way to go forward.
So is getting rid of dependence on Russia making the countries realize that they need nuclear energy? Mr. Berger, Mr. Dion?
Well, about the countries would think they don't want to use nuclear energy. It's their choice. The only point Canada would like to make is it will make the world very unsafe regarding climate change if nuclear is not accepted as part of a solution. I will give you some numbers. Today, according to the International Energy Agency, nuclear energy provides 10% of global electricity supply, 10%. The whole clean electricity sources, so that means not coal, not natural gas, renewables and nuclear. Nuclear 10 plus 26 the other sources of clean energy. So 36% today of the electricity of the world is not emitting, 36%. If we want to be carbon neutral, the developed countries for 2050, which is our goal, the goal of the EU, the goal of Canada, the goal of the US, everyone. Well, according to the International Energy Agency, it's not 36% of the electricity that should be non-emitting for 2040, 20 years from now, 18 years from now. It is 85. From 36 to 85 in 20 years, electricity should be not emitting. That means, according to them, we need to increase the global nuclear power generation by 80% between now and 2040. That's the numbers. If people think we may be carbon neutral for 2050 without nuclear, you need to do the maths.
So is Poland doing the math when it comes to climate neutrality, but also the dependence? Mr. Berger, what's your take on this issue of energy dependence and getting rid of it by entering the nuclear energy?
First of all, we've seen last time that stabilizing role of gas a little bit changed because of the prices.
A little bit, just a little bit, yeah.
So I think we have to redefine our standpoint in case also of nuclear, because in the case of gas, we've just opened a new connection, the Baltic pipe, due to engagement, my predecessor, Mr. Minister Piotr Naimski, and absolutely huge respect for the job that he's done. But just with the opening, we've seen the attack at the Nord Stream 1 and the second, and then we have to really redefine about all the sources of these stabilizing sources of energy, because now we can see that infrastructure that normally civil infrastructure in time of peace, but even on the war at your borders, nobody could even assume that something like that could happen in the civil infrastructure. So now we have to also look for the sources which can be independent. I mean, they are located inland with this very strong securitization of all the aspects of government. So absolutely, it's good time to make a decision and redefine. Generally, I'm a huge fan of renewables, and here also it's a very important role of nuclear for stabilizing.
Yeah, so we need to stabilize renewables, so we are meeting the climate goals. But I'd like to ask you a bit more about those unconvinced countries, because Mr. Dion said that, of course, it is their choice, but on the other hand, their choices impact whole Europe when it comes to supply of energy. And if they are not producing enough energy because they don't want to have nuclear energy, we all have less energy to be disposed among the member states. So, Mr. Berger, what's your take on countries which are not convinced? Do you try to convince them?
I'm not that much expert in this field, but I think on the political level, we have to, first of all, talk each other. And what I can see, and last days, also with our friends from Denmark, from Norway, from a lot of countries from Europe, there is a surface to talk about. And nowadays, really, we, like a few months ago, no one got these issues to underline, and now it's like top topic, the energy prices and all the energy securitization. So I think it's also our role to, first of all, trying to convince, but trying to clarify. And I think also the development of SMRs with some new technology solutions could convince people that we can have a cheap and safe energy sources.
Let's hope so, but how is it going from the point of view of Euratom? You have all the countries on board, so you see how it goes. Did Energy Crunch change something? Do we have a wind of change when it comes to nuclear energy?
Well, I would say that Poland's decision to enter nuclear energy is something that has certainly been seen, and that it shows that this choice is a rational choice. I mean, we could have long discussions on the level of emotions, on the level of orthodox thinking. But looking rationally, and this is looking at the scenarios even made by the European Commission about reaching the 2030, 2050 targets. This is the necessary base load. This is the cheapest energy that we have, even considering the end of the fuel cycle, meaning all the questions related with the decommissioning and then nuclear waste. Mm-hmm. That still is a very reliable source. And I think that is, it's very difficult to convince those that don't want to be convinced. And it is the principle that the energy mix, and in particular the inclusion of nuclear, is the choice of a member state. But I think that this decision will be one looking what nuclear could offer is something that will be looked into very carefully by a number of member states. And this is also connected with the development of SMRs. I mean, let me be very, very frank. SMRs are not a replacement for big nuclear reactors because of the scale, and however, they are an excellent choice as complementing the big nuclear power plants, and also excellent choice for smaller member states who wouldn't need to go into the full-scale nuclear
the countries
power
like
plants.
Poland need the big conventional nuclear power plants.
Yeah, I believe that Poland, as a large member state, needs both, and they need both of them should be complementary, both in terms of the connection to the grid, location of industry, and many other elements.
Okay, gentlemen, could you elaborate on this distinction between small and big nuclear power plants?
You asked Mr. Jakovic just before, do we try to convince countries that are reluctant? Well, we are Canadian. We respect the other point of view. I was in Germany for the last 5 years as ambassador. I did not spend a lot of time to convince the Germans to use nuclear. We discussed much more about hydrogen and LNG and other solutions. They don't want nuclear. Okay. But the world cannot be without nuclear. That's our view. I gave the numbers. If we want to be climate neutral on time to protect our planet, nuclear should be part of the solution. And every country willing to do so, Canada is ready to work with them, but we will be intransigent about security and non-proliferation. You want to work with us, accept these standards, because for us it's not something we're ready to negotiate and compromise about.
Okay, SMRs and big nuclear difference, your take, maybe in Canada there will be some breakthrough when it comes to small modular reactors soon, so what's your take? Are they complementary or there are alternatives?
SMRs will be very needed. There is no doubt in our mind, and we'll be ready to be a champion of it. But again, there are dangers of proliferation, and we're well aware of that, and we'll make sure the standards are ironclad, secure for the world. That's key. I understand countries saying it's too dangerous, we should not go there. Our view is that we need to go there. It's part of the solution, but it must be properly done, and Canada will make sure that the technology we'll offer to the world will be completely safe.
It should be. Of course it should be. And Mr. Berger, SMRs and big nuclear?
Of course, in the Polish nuclear power program, we would like to get to 6 nuclear units with 6 to 9 gigawatts of capacity, with the first reactor working under 2033. But talking about the SMRs, it's like completely, of course, like Casimir said, it's completely two different things. So in the field of SMRs, I think somebody has to be first. I mean, with all the certifications, with some regulations of the PPA agreements by SMRs, we've got a great solution for future medium entrepreneurs who would like to stabilize, especially in these unstable times, the price of energy. And by setting this PPA, I think for even for medium businesses, by getting the SMRs real, but I think within really next early years we're gonna have it happened. I think it's also absolutely it's place for everybody here.
So just in the middle of our discussion about the nuclear renaissance that is happening all over the world, from the IAEA data we can see that. In general, we have this issue of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that is being used by Russia to blackmail Europe, and some say that it is also a tool to make Europeans be again afraid of nuclear power plants. So how should we answer such instrumentalization of nuclear energy by Russia? What's your take on it? Wants to speak? Yeah, Mr. Berger, of course.
Here maybe I'm not that much proper person to talk about. I think it's all about this war is to make this fear and to have this loopholes in regular normal way of thinking. That's maybe not now because of the Nord Streams, but they are trying to reestablish the old order that I think could never have place. I think we need to educate people. Because, as I said, maybe I'm not proper person to say, but even if there is any kind of pollution, I don't want to even call it like in public, but nearby the nuclear plant, it's only very, very, very close area which is polluted. Even when you read something about the Chernobyl catastrophe, it's not like it can happen to like the whole continent. Of course, there are many aspects of this, but nuclear energy, nuclear plant is not a nuclear weapon. What you mentioned. So I think we have to first of all educate people and get them the best knowledge to do not feel afraid.
Mr. Dion.
Today, I come back to climate. When we started to tackle climate change in 1990, the world, oil, gas and coal, fossil fuels, were 86% of the source of energy for the world. And today is still more than 80%. So we have a huge, huge challenge facing us. And for Canada, our view is that everything should be part of the solution, which is safe and non-emitting. And nuclear is part of it. So I come back.
About Zaporizhia, Canada and Poland asked to let the inspectors from IAEA to enter the nuclear power plant. They were inside, so is this assuring for you that nothing will happen in Zaporizhia, that this event shouldn't be an argument against nuclear energy in Europe?
But what is an argument is an argument against war.
Yeah, obviously.
If we say we cannot build nuclear plants because we want to be back to war, but then what can we do? What is safe in the world? That what Putin has done, it's awful for the world, awful for Ukraine, awful for Russia, but awful for the world for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that now we have doubts about everything. Yeah. Then I don't know, when at the time when we need to pool all our resources to make our relationship with the planet sustainable, we spend so much more money to fight against each other instead of being all together. This war is an absolute tragedy.
From this perspective, also from climate perspective, it is obviously a tragedy, but when it comes to Zaporizhia and Euratom, do you think that this event would influence our discussion? Is it influencing it? Is it fueling anti-nuclear movements?
Okay. Nuclear is powerful, and this is its beauty, but it comes with risks. So far, we have always been thinking how to prevent human error. And now we are somehow starting to think about different type of risks. And in that sense, I think we all put a lot of support to the International Atomic Energy Agency and their group of observers and the efforts that they undertake in order to ensure that the situation in Zaporizhia is under international monitoring. Zaporizhia is a relatively modern power plant. It has nothing to do with the old Chernobyl type. It is now passively shut down. It is in the safe and stable condition. And of course, it does not say that the risks do not exist, not the risks of human error, but the risks that are based on a human decision. But it is not that easy to make a move that would endanger that would endanger Europe or further countries. That having said, yes, there is certain risk. It would probably be very much geographically focused in the area directly around Zaporizhia, but this is nothing to compare to any of the big crisis situations. Like 3 Miles, like Chernobyl, like Fukushima.
Okay, so we see how serious this discussion is, and we hear that the situation around nuclear power in Europe is changing, that we need to have it to pursue the climate neutrality, to have this energy independence. There are solutions for fuel supply, for different kinds of cooperation in our Western family to be more secure and more climate friendly in the same time. But what's your take on it? What are your questions? We have several minutes for a question for audience. We have a mic somewhere over there. There is someone coming, so take your time and grab the mic. Please present yourself, and could you ask a question? Oh, okay, so there's a room for a question. I thought that someone is coming, so no one is coming, but the nuclear energy is coming in Poland, I hope. If someone is not wanting nuclear energy in their own borders, let us have it. That's my take, that's my opinion. I have just one more question to our distinguished guests about the nuclear power plant future from the economic point of view. We have an economic crisis on the way. We should face it in places like WSF. We should be frank about those issues. So nuclear energy is a part of solution of economic crisis. What is the economic gain from the nuclear power plant? Yep.
I mean, I will add something very, very small, because I will talk only about nuclear fuel. As I said, Russia was actually artificially decreasing prices in the market, which means we will have to be paying more at each stage of the nuclear fuel cycle, from uranium mining through conversion, enrichment, and then fuel fabrication. But does it mean that the prices of electricity will go up? Not so much, because nuclear fuel price contributes only 10% to the price of nuclear generated electricity. So even if, so here we are talking about the price increase that would be below 2%, and that is something that should not be the triggering the inflation of the energy prices. So from that point of view, nuclear energy is helping keeping the energy prices at a reasonable level.
And we see how important is that, Mr. Dion?
Well, it's because nothing is cheap. Nothing is free. If we want to not use any more natural gas and coal and oil, well, the other solutions are solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, clean hydrogen, and CO2 carbon capture and storage using, again, coal and oil, but in capturing the CO2. All these technologies are very costly, and nuclear, in many circumstances, will be competitive. So Canada is not saying we should use nuclear at the expense of the other solutions, but it should be part of the solution, because otherwise the amount of investments we'll need to do this energy transition will be much more complicated to find. And the intermittency of some of these sources of energy will be more difficult to cope with.
So we need nuclear energy as a baseload. And Mr. Berger?
We are at the Security Forum, so I think there is one sentence that I can say: just security has no price. And it also, in case of the nuclear, especially for not only for business but for everyone, when you can have a stable source, you've got this certainty, forecasting, stabilizing aspects. So this is those crucial aspects for for people, for business, for countries to develop. So I think, of course, we have to redefine after this crisis, which I really believe we are in the edge of. But yeah.
So we are discussing nuclear energy in Poland for 30 years, and your people have this possibility to make a decision this way or another, but you can make a decision, and I keep my fingers crossed for it, because it should happen in several weeks, as you spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, Thank you for this wonderful conversation. It was Mateusz Berger, Government Plenipotentiary for Strategic Energy Infrastructure in Poland. Minister Stefan Dion, the Prime Minister Special Envoy from Canada to EU and Europe, and Ms. Agnieszka Kaźmierczak, the Director General of Euratom Supply Agency. Thank you very much. Big applause for our panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, I would like to thank you very much for coming to the first Energy and Climate track of the Warsaw Security Forum. I think it was an extremely interesting perspective combining energy, and we had excellent experts today, with the defense, which is a traditional track of Warsaw Security Forum. And starting from this year, we will be able to discuss both, and we will be able also to follow the progress. We started tomorrow with regional perspective. We have seen Lithuania, Estonia, and Romania. Then we talk about climate and security perspective. We talked about oil and gas trap, and we ended up with nuclear. We all agreed that we need to move further beyond our actual energy mix, and we need to rebuild it in a way which will secure Europe and which will make us more resilient to future shocks, and especially which will make it independent from imported fossil fuels from Russia. This is an important conclusion, and I hope we will be able to discuss it further on during the general outlook, which will start in this precisely forum 1:10. So for the moment, I invite all of you to take an excellent lunch, a coffee, and be back here at 1:10. Thank you very much.